we're going to call it to order. I didn't get much sleep last night, so I'm hoping I can do this well. It seems like it's been a long time since we've been together. It's been 4 months since we changed the schedule. Usually we get together in January, so it's been 4 months. Yeah. Dr. Noland, unfortunately, is not able to be here. She has a family emergency, but Anne-Marie will go ahead and call the roll.
Dr. Waterhouse.
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan.
Here.
Dr. Nunez.
Here.
Jennifer Laredo.
Here.
Kathy Bowler.
Here.
Judy Mancuso.
Here.
And again, Dr. Noland is absent today, as is Alana Yanez, our other public member who recently had a brand new baby boy. So congratulations to her, but she is home taking care of her newborn. So
Maybe she's watching.
she might be.
Yes. So anyway, we've established a quorum. I think I've had my opening remarks. Are there any comments from the board members? Since that's on agenda item number 2.
Guest. Introduce guest.
We will, but first it says board member comments. Okay, good. Now, this is the time for introductions by any members of the public. It's voluntary, but if you'd like to introduce yourselves, maybe we could start on this side.
Cindy Staley, RDT, CDFMU, and Sacramento Valley Veterans Association. Nancy Irwin, California RDT Association. Valerie Pennsylvania, CDMA.
Graham Miller, CBMA.
Leah Schulte, CDMA. Erica Hughes, State Humane Association of California.
Arthur Scott, CBMA.
Diana Duffin, PCA.
John Matthew, EPA. Brian Reardon, Patrick Lake, Department of Consumer Affairs.
Susan Tibbins, Small Pharma.
Paul Hansberry, Lovely Legally. Charles Lozo, attorney, operator of Right Ratio.
Gary Richter, Holistic Veterinary Care.
Rick Arthur, Equine Medical Director, UC Davis, signed the California Horse Racing Board.
Bill Laird with the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency.
And Rick Bedecker from the California Horse Racing Board.
Thank you.
I'd also like to say that Dinky Poo is here.
Oh, yes. Maybe we should actually introduce Dinky Poo there.
Special visitor of the day.
Dinky Poo.
Dinky Poo.
So they know who Dr. Nunez is referring to.
And she does have voting rights.
Okay, on to agenda item number 3, approval of the minutes from our October meeting. Any changes or corrections on page 1, 2, 3? Or on 5, there's an extra word in, what about the second paragraph down under V, add section? That first line should read, the MDC and is consistent with, so take out the N. I'm taking over Lee Heller's place as grammatician. Anything on page 6? 7.
I've got one on page 6. From the top, 4th line down, the board discussed the legislative authorized human study that should be statutorily authorized. On page 6, from the top, 4th line down,
Oh, I got it.
Page 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11? Any comments from the public? Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to adopt.
Second.
We'll call for the vote?
Dr. Waterhouse.
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Dr. Nunez.
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo.
Yes.
Kathy Bowler.
Yes.
Judy Mancuso.
Yes.
Motion carries.
And then agenda item number 4, review of the minutes from our teleconference on December 11th. This one's much shorter. Does anybody have any corrections on this one?
I do. On page 3, item 4, first paragraph, third line down, toward the end, he requested the board consider agendizing.
Spelling.
Agonizing.
I wonder what that means, agonizing.
I think there's like a.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Any comments from the public?
I think we should leave it at agonizing.
Agonizing.
No, that was a joke.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
Second.
Okay, call for the vote?
Dr. Waterhouse.
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Dr. Nunez.
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo.
Yes.
Kathy Bowler.
Yes.
Judy Mancuso.
Yes.
Agenda item number 5, election of officers, and Anne Marie and Tara are going to handle this one.
Okay, so typically we do our election of our public officers in October, and they assume their post in January the following year. We did not do elections in October, so we're doing them a little late this year in February. But at this point, I would like to call for a nomination for the position of vice president. Do I have any nominations?
I was gonna nominate Dr. Sullivan.
Dr. Sullivan.
For election as vice president.
Okay.
Have either of them, termed out, or can they do it another term?
So they're both eligible, well, either of these,
Yeah.
our current president and vice president? Yes, they both can. They're both eligible for another term. Yes,
Okay.
Is your
yes.
mic on?
I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so we have a nomination for Dr. Sullivan for
I'll
vice
second-
president.
I'll second it.
Okay. Dr. Sullivan, do you accept that nomination?
Yes.
Okay. Any other nominations for vice president? Okay, I'm going to call for the vote. Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
Yes.
Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
Congratulations on term number 2 as vice president. Glutton for punishment. Okay, so I'm going to call for the nomination for the role of president of the board. Do I have a nomination?
Can I,
Kathy Lear.
just not to hog it, so to speak. I would like to renominate Cheryl, Dr. Waterhouse, to be president for another term.
And I'll second.
Okay. Do you accept that nomination?
Yes.
Are there any other nominations for the role of president of the Veterinary Medical Board? Dinky wants to be nominated. That seems fitting. Okay, if I hear no other nominations, I'm going to call for a vote. Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
Yes.
And Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, on to agenda item number 6, discussion and possible board action on nominations for leadership positions within the AAVSB. And we have Kathy Bowler, who's represented our board well on the ICVA, which is sort of a subdivision of the AAVSB. And so that's in 6. So we need to nominate Kathy to continue in this role, because you've served your first term,
Right, it's a
Of
3-year
3
term.
years, and you can have 3 terms, is that correct?
That's on
Yes.
the ICVA, which is the International Council of Veterinary Assessments.
Yes, okay. Do you want to say anything about what kind of role you fulfill on that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because as the one public member for this national board, I thought, what do I bring to the table? I've never taken the NAVLE, and that's really what the ICV does is veterinary assessments. It produces the NAVLE, which is what every student in Canada and the U.S. and in other schools, and we're starting to do it abroad, must take to be eligible to take the boards. Now, we in California have a state board, but other states just use the NAVLE, I believe, as their ability to be licensed. So anyway, I enjoy that, and I participate in all the, and I think some of our members have participated in pool reviews and item review. It's very interesting how they do this scientifically and score the questions and how security cautious it is and psychometrically sound the test is. And I go back in April to do the pool review, which is the questions, the sets of questions for the next NAVLE, which will be next fall. But anyway, so I really enjoy it, and I'd love to be reappointed.
Anybody else? Yes, Dr. Nunez.
I had a question. It says that there's 4 AAVSB representatives to the council. Who else is on the council?
The other other than the 4 ASVB,
Right.
AS, whatever. There are 13 members. We just redid our governance board, and you have some specific species like bovine expert, porcine expert, and there's members from the College of Education. AHA has there's representatives from all different things. The one public member comes from the AAVSB, and the other 3 from them are all vets.
And it says international, so other.
Yeah, it's Canada, but now they've been, I think a couple of the schools in Great Britain, and certainly the Caribbean schools, Ross and those, and there have been, there's been interest in some other, we're looking at other countries,
So they
especially in Europe.
They produce other exams other than NAVLE.
They produce NAVLE and the VIA, which is a veterinary assessment, and that is for in college, in vet school. Students can take it, and colleges use it to assess the sort of the progress of their students. In addition, they have some species-specific things that they're working on as well, and they're trying to broaden that whole package of assessments. They work closely with the colleges and all the and the boards in the provinces and the states.
So those special assessments we use in our enforcement cases when we need to assign someone an actual exam to test their knowledge if it was a competency-based discipline. So they're really important. Right now, I believe the special assessments come out of AAVSB, but ICVA is working, no, they do come out of ICVA.
Right.
VA. AAVSB, I think, is also now working on some form of special assessments.
And if you recall, in October, I gave that presentation on our veterinary practice survey that was done Canada, U.S. We had about a 35% response rate, which was huge, and that sort of it changed things slightly on the competencies and the areas, and it'll slightly change the blueprint for the tests coming up. For instance, more questions on communication with clients and with other veterinarians. There's some more fish questions because of the aquaculture of fish. So that's being retooled, and that'll happen in 2019. That'll be a new NAVLE. And they're looking at different modalities to test, not just, it's all multiple choice now, but looking at other segments you could put into the test that might assess a veterinarian's ability to make some, judgment and the communication, because that's hard to assess on a test without it being obvious.
Well, we really thank you for your volunteer
I love
efforts,
it.
because I know there's no pay in this, but it's it's a really important function that you're fulfilling. So we really thank you for that.
No, I love it. I like to try and answer the questions myself.
Yes, Judy.
So it says there's 2 open, a licensed vet and another public member. Can we send others from our board for these if somebody wanted?
There's only one public member at all. If we're seeing something else that says another,
The upcoming 2018, 2019 AAVSB
That's me. I mean, that's the seat I hold now.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So the other open one is,
John Betts
It-
is
John-
currently
yes.
filling that, and he can serve another term. But it
Right.
would be up to his board if they want to nominate him in that
oh,
role
he's in a
again.
different state.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in Oregon. Yeah.
All right,
No.
Yeah.
sorry, I missed that.
No, sorry about that. There's only one public on it.
So we just need a
vote, yeah.
motion so we need a motion to
Nominate.
nominate Kathy.
So moved.
To continue in this role.
Jennifer
So
Bailey,
moved.
I'll second it.
Okay, call for the vote.
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
Should I not vote?
No, you
you
should, you
should-
can vote
Oh,
for
I should
yourself.
vote. Okay.
Yeah, and Judy
Yes.
Mancuso.
Yes,
Okay, and there's a letter already included in the packet that I will now send under Cheryl's signature to confirm our nomination. And I know that from my conversations with the executive director of ICVA, they have been very, very pleased with Kathy's knowledge and expertise, and she's not the average public member, so they know how good they have it right now.
yay, go Kathy.
Thank you. Could I say one more thing, just because it's a general announcement?
Yeah.
I believe we've got, and you have in hand, and I think possibly even CVMA got it, requests out there
Yeah.
asking for species experts and other members of the vet boards to come and participate in the pool review process, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think a couple of our board members in the past have done that, but I want to encourage, if you have the time to do it, it's quite interesting, and you really get a great sense of how really critical and detailed this testing is in the process going into it. But the item writing, that's takes a lot of time, but pool review and
Yeah.
form review we just did that in January, and then the final form review is in April. So if board members can go,
Yep.
it's a 2-day thing in Philadelphia.
I think it's under Cheryl's report, Dr.
Oh,
Waterhouse.
sorry.
No,
Never
that's
mind
fine.
then.
Okay, no.
It's okay to say it twice. Dr. Waterhouse will be
Yes.
covering that too in her board president report.
Tomorrow, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Okay, on to agenda item number 7A, status of pending regulations. So Anne Marie will inform us of the current status.
Okay, so under 7A, you have a status update of what's pending. We finally got the animal control officer training regulations into effect. I know there are several animal control officers that were waiting for this to occur, so thank goodness it's 2 years overdue. We have our Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative regulations that are under the final review with the department right now. Our disciplinary guidelines were approved by the board. We had some comments back from legal regarding the documents. Those changes have been made. I need to resubmit those to the department. You can read the rest of these. The only one that we are currently working on in terms of in the process, everything else is kind of scheduled in the queue, is our emergency fee regulations, which have been approved by the Department of Consumer Affairs, approved by Business Services and Housing Agency, and are now published on our website. They will go over to the Office of Administrative Law today, and then they will take effect if they're approved by the Office of Administrative Law, they'll take effect within 10 days. So I want to extend a special thank you to the Department of Consumer Affairs and to agency for their expeditious review. Phil Laird's here today, and he was the one that got assigned these regs, and we already have a prior relationship with Phil working at the California Horse Racing Board, so I don't think it was fortuitous, but we had some luck on our side this time, so thank you, Phil. And the other regulation package that we've been working on and that went through DCA for what we call the pre-review was the telehealth or telemedicine document. However, we've had some recent updates to a national policy that came out from the American Association of Veterinary State Boards, and that may in some way alter the language that this board has approved. There are things in that policy document that we will talk about later that have a direct impact to the language the board approved at its last meeting. So we'll talk about that later on in the agenda. Any questions on the status document before we move on?
I have a question under animal rehab.
Mhm.
So it doesn't have the third task force meeting on here.
Oh, it's just left off of
Yeah.
the notes?
Yeah.
We can make sure we add that. There were 3. Any other questions from the board? Questions from the public?
Nancy Ehrlich, California RBT Association. I had a question about the RBT education regulations that have been sitting around since February of 15. That's now 3 years.
Mhm.
When can we expect that they will be noticed for approval?
Actually, that's a very timely conversation. Amanda Drummond of our staff has been working on those regs for the last probably 3 months, and so she's just finished all the prep work on them. They will go over to the department, and they will go under legal review. So that's the next regulatory package in line.
Okay. So what does that mean in terms of timeline?
Regs typically are taking 12 to 18 months, more on the 18-month side, unfortunately, and that has to do with a pre-review process that we have to go through now before we can even file them with the Office of Administrative Law. So,
So 18 months from now?
yeah, roughly, 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
Moving on to agenda item number 7B, discussion and possible board action on the following regulatory proposals. So our first one is from the California Horse Racing Board. And
Yeah, we have
we have people
executive
here-
director.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
we have people here today for that. Anne Marie, do you want to start
Sure.
to explain the?
If you'd like me to, I can give a little bit of background
Yes,
on this. So this is a regulatory proposal that I have been involved with discussing with Rick Vettiger and also Philip Laird when he was counsel for the California Horse Racing Board. And truly what we have here is an issue with safety of the animal. This is a separate situation from what we deal with in traditional veterinary medicine, where medical records are confidential and cannot be shared unless there is a release of disclosure, a release of authorization from the client. In this situation, because records between veterinarians cannot be shared when a horse is sold to a new owner, any medical ailments or any problems with the horse that might prevent that horse from entering a race may go undetected. And that can be obviously dangerous for the horse and also dangerous for the jockey. And so the California Horse Racing Board is before us today to request our support in a carve-out of their provisions, not the Veterinary Medical Board's provisions, but their provisions, which would allow for the exchange of medical records between veterinarians when a horse is sold at a claiming race. So hopefully I did you justice in explaining that.
Yes, very much so.
Those are the cliff notes, but I'm going to turn it over to you now.
All right, thank you. Once again, I'm Rick Vettiger, Executive Director of the Horse Racing Board, and
Dr. Rick Arthur, Equine Medical Director at UC Davis, assigned to the California Horse Racing Board.
with your indulgence, I have some prepared notes here so I don't forget anything. And we do want to come before you today for 2 purposes. One, as Anne Marie described, was to have you consider the proposed rule that we will be moving to our board, but also as courtesy to make you aware of what we're doing. And so, you know, halfway into the process, you don't learn about it and don't understand the reasons for it, perhaps. And so we want to, again, explain it to you and see what you think, and we'll go from there. We're doing this because we perceive that we have a significant problem in horse racing, and we've come up with a rule that we think will address it. You may or may not know that the way the racing works, the racetracks work with the horse owners and trainers to present different types of races that will allow horses to gradually move from one condition to another. This will, for instance, allow a horse that has, say, only won one race in its life to race against other horses that have also only won one race in their lives. After winning another race, they will similarly be protected by the conditions of the race that have horses that have only won twice, for instance. There's other categories in racing. There's three primarily. Non-winners race in maiden races. The really good horses run in allowance and stakes races, and the rest, for the most part, run in what are called claiming races, where horses are entered for a claiming price. A claiming price is actually a sales tag. So in a race written for horses entered for a claiming price of, say, $25,000, any horse may be claimed or purchased for that amount out of that race by a licensed owner. If the horse wins at that $25,000 claiming level, it might be subsequently moved up to a $35,000 claiming level. Conversely, if the horse is not competitive at a $25,000 level, it might be entered for a cheaper claiming price of, say, $16,000. And that drop in claiming price might, as a matter of fact, increase the chance that the horse will be claimed. A prospective owner will see maybe a good opportunity to purchase a horse that's dropping down a little bit. The purpose of these claiming races is to keep racing competitive and to allow a horse to race at its competitive level and not be overmatched every time that it goes onto the racetrack. Now, these races are fairly common in California racing throughout the country. And of course, we race north and south day and night. We have 4 meets operating at one time. Now, here's the issue. We're constantly monitoring losses in racing, catastrophic injuries. We've done a number of things over the past many years to reduce those numbers, to improve the safeguards in place for racehorses. In this particular situation, we want to talk about the transfer of medical records for these horses that are claimed. So imagine that you have a horse and he's entered in a claiming race, and you know the medical history of this horse. You know, as a matter of fact, that he has certain issues and so forth. But in a claiming race, as opposed to a private purchase and sale, in a claiming race, you basically put in a claim for the horse in the moments leading up to the race. When the horse goes into the gate, he belongs to the current owner. As soon as the gate opens, he belongs to the new owner that just claimed him out of the race. In a private sale, we have the opportunity to negotiate a veterinary examination of the horse in question. And based on the results, we may or may not consummate that sale. But in a claiming race, there is no such opportunity. So the new owner, the new trainer, the new veterinarian has no idea what the medical history is of the horse. There's a particular concern in horse racing about intra-articular corticosteroid injections. They've become a very common treatment for racehorses. As I'm sure you probably know, such treatment reduces the inflammation associated with an injury, but it doesn't heal the injury. Under current restrictions, a horse may be treated with such an injection a week before it races. And here's where the issue is. It can be claimed out of a race a week later and transferred to the new owner. And the new veterinarian will have no way of knowing the horse's history, possibly injecting that joint too soon again. So our proposed rule would do two things, and I understand you have a copy of it in your packet. It would require that a copy of all existing veterinary medical records for a horse claimed in a claiming race shall be transferred from the horse's attending veterinarian to the horse's new owner within 7 days of that claim. The second part is veterinarians attending a horse for the first time after it is claimed shall review all medical records provided to the owner or their designee prior to treating the horse. We appreciate the importance of confidentiality when it comes to medical records, but state law does make an exception, which is applicable, we think, in this case. Code 4857A4 states that the records may be disclosed, quote, as required to ensure compliance with any federal, state, county, or city law or regulation. So our proposed rule would therefore permit the transfer of records in this particular situation for any horse that is claimed out of a claiming race, as we described. Our goal here is simple: to better protect the life of the racehorse. And of course, when we're talking about a horse that is racing, we're also aiming to protect the life of the jockey who is riding. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Arthur to talk about the veterinarian implications.
Yeah, I think Executive Director Bedecker said it very well. I mean, this is a health and welfare issue for both horses and jockeys. The reason the board requires medical records be maintained is because those medical records are important for making future veterinary decisions. And what we want to do is put the health of the horse in front and center. It is that the new veterinarian has the benefit of this horse's past medical history so that they make future decisions, understanding what has gone before them. Certainly, they're not repeating treatments that shouldn't be repeated too quickly, and that allows the veterinarian to make the best decision that they possibly can. What we do see, and where this gets into a real problem, and we've shared some more egregious cases with Anne-Marie and staff, is when horses are getting towards the end of the career, they're wearing out, if you will, and there's a tendency in these horses to transfer, and we've seen some horse go to 2 or 3 different trainers within a month or two and have the same joint injected again and again, and it ends up in a catastrophic injury eventually. So the purpose of this is that the horse's health comes first. The veterinarian who has care and custody of that horse or is attending that horse understands what went on before them. So that's the purpose behind this regulation.
So we're happy to take any questions or hear any comments. Dr. Arthur said it well too. We're making good progress. We'll never stop making progress until every horse is ultimately as safe as it can be. This situation needs to be addressed, and we believe that our board will support it, and we're happy to hear any comments that you might have about it.
I would like to add, there's a similar regulation in New York gaming regulations, which regulates horse racing in that state, and other jurisdictions have implemented similar rules and regulations in other states.
So I'd like to thank you for that very good explanation of claiming races, because I've always wondered exactly how they work, and that was a great explanation.
Thank you.
I do have a question about the 7 days. In our current Practice Act, it says that records should be transferred within 5 days, so I wondered what the difference was. Or did you just pick 7 days as a
In
number?
the proposed rule?
So in our current regs, it says the records should be transferred within 5 days.
5 days would be preferable. We thought we were being generous,
Okay.
and would certainly welcome a change to 5 days if that's your recommendation.
I would say, again, this is a draft that hasn't even been put before a committee with the horse racing board. So we're
I didn't know if there was something special about claiming races and horses, and maybe Anne-Marie can speak to.
Well, no, not the claiming race, but the 5-day rule in the VPA, the Veterinary Practice Act, really has to do with when a client requests records for their animal. So let's say they're changing vets. And as you probably know, they can request records and get a summary at least within 5 days. If 7 days provides for a reasonable amount of time between owners to get the medical records transferred from the veterinarian to the owner, it wouldn't impact our Practice Act in terms of what we require of the veterinarian to the client. It's really a call of your board.
I don't think there'd be any objection to the 5 days, 5 days to keep it consistent. It would seem to make sense.
Dr. Nunez.
I would ask the question, why wouldn't it be immediate? The owner of a horse that has a horse in a claiming race knows that there's a possibility that it's going to be claimed, and I don't think it's that difficult to transfer records. What if the new veterinarian needs to treat the horse within that 5 days and doesn't have the records? Is it that difficult to transfer records immediately? And it also begs the question, why is this being regulated? Has there historically been a reluctance for previous owners to transfer records to new owners?
Truthfully, the reluctance is not on the part of the owners, it's on the part of the trainers. And practically speaking, the owners designate the trainers as, for the client-patient relationship. And so the trainers really have a lot of control, and honestly, we've had a lot of resistance from trainers. And so we're at the point where we're saying we're going to overcome that resistance. There is a practical matter of racing is conducted Thursdays through Sundays. It might be very difficult for a horse that's claimed on a Sunday for the veterinary records to be transferred immediately at that time when basically we're dark the next few days in racing. So it's a practical matter, and I think, to your point, I think there could be some language that addresses the types of treatment that can't be done before those records are reviewed. But certainly if there was an emergency situation, an urgent situation, there'd have to be an exception for that. And we may, as a matter of fact, have other language that addresses that scenario.
Yeah.
But a good point.
We would expect the 5 or 7 days to be the maximum amount of time, and in those states that have implemented these sorts of provisions, sometimes it's even quicker than that. It's within a day or two. There are instances where horses do run back within a week, and where that would be important.
No, I'm very much impressed. In small animal medicine, we certainly don't request previous medical records before we treat. So it's quite impressive that you're pursuing this.
Kathy?
My question was very similar to Mark's. It was about, is it and I think you've explained it, but is it unreasonable to ask somebody bringing a horse to a track for a claiming race to also bring the paperwork? And I understand trainers have a lot on their plate, and maybe that's part of the problem, but I would suggest, 5 days, seems to be more reasonable, especially what you're talking about in terms of the steroid shots.
And I like the consistency with
Yeah.
current language, your language.
I don't want to digress, but there is a national effort to require people who ship in from other racing jurisdictions to bring the medical records for examination. The trainers are opposed to that, even though it's standard operating procedure in Europe. So, we're a little bit of a hard to change industry, and we're trying to get it to change. So that's all I can tell you.
Any other questions from the board?
Just one comment
Are
before.
are we voting on this?
First, we're just
Yeah,
asking
just
for questions.
discussing. And I don't think you need a vote from us on this. You're just wanting to get any questions or concerns we have regarding this because you haven't brought it before your board yet, correct?
We'd like two things.
Yeah.
One, we're doing right now, we're just making you aware of what we're up to. The other thing is that as it comes before our board,
Yeah.
it would be very helpful to say that we have the support of this board.
Sure.
We've really enjoyed working with your board over the last few years on kindred issues. Really it strengthens our backbone, and that it will do that in this situation too. If our board members here that we've been here, that you understand what we're doing and support it, then when we butt up against that curmudgeon mentality that Dr. Arthur described, we'll overcome it.
And I think the board has done this in the past. We support the concepts of these things in case the language changes, after your board reviews this and they have other comments. You're looking for conceptual support of this provision.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think we can assure you we will keep the Veterinary Medical Board apprised of any changes to this regulation as it moves through our processes.
Jennifer?
I just wanted to make a comment. For a lot of the public, the horse racing industry is not known for putting the welfare of the horse first, so it's very refreshing to see that you guys are doing that. And as a horse owner, I appreciate that. Thank you.
The public certainly does too, and our board is passionate about this issue, thankfully. And so, under Dr. Arthur's tutelage, we've been able to move a number of issues over the last couple of years, and you can imagine from your work, we're seeing results. And so that also gives people more impetus to make needed changes. This is one of those.
Any comments from the public? Oh, sorry, Judy does have a question.
And I represent the part of the public that would like to see horse racing off the face of the planet, so I might as well just throw that out there since we're representing the public right now.
Any comments from the public? Yes. If one of you could switch with
Yeah, we might
Grant.
share the mic.
Hi, Grant Miller, CVMA. Just like to take this opportunity to just ask a couple of questions, and maybe they're ones that haven't been considered yet. In this language, it says that the record shall be transferred. Would that be something where the board, the horse racing board, asks the veterinarian or notifies the veterinarian that there's been a claim on one of their patients, and then therefore the veterinarian has to give the records? Or is the veterinarian supposed to, is it incumbent upon the veterinarian to know which of their patients are claiming and then transfer the records?
Not sure. We'll probably cross that bridge when we get there. The claims are known instantaneously and announced. So it would be incumbent upon probably the trainer, who is the central figure in all of these transactions, to notify the veterinarian that, as a matter of fact, the horse has been claimed and the records need to be transferred.
All right, and then another question, would the records go to the horse racing board to then be transferred to the new owner, or is it a direct transfer between?
It's a direct transfer.
All right. One suggestion, veterinarians are very familiar with our California Code of Regulations, Title 16, 2032.3b, which talks about the transfer of records. That is part of the 5-day requirement that we have. We are very used to transferring a summary of the records, which is, the record itself has 13 requirements, but the summary has 6 requirements. For all intents and purposes, the 6 requirements are the information that you're seeking to, give the pertinent information about joint injection history, medical history, who owned this horse. And a lot of our veterinary software is attuned to be able to create this summary very quickly and easily. So you may want to consider looking at that language as you go forward, since it does have the 5 days in it, and we're very used to complying with that.
Sure,
Thank
good
you.
suggestion. There'll be more talented people than myself that will look at it and make those suggestions.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public?
Well, would it be appropriate to say that this board approves the concept, especially with the language on what could and could not be performed in that little 5-day period where you may not have the records?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a motion?
Is that an official motion there, Mark?
That's an official motion.
Okay. To support in concept. Dr. Sullivan?
As I read this, the second portion is the new veterinarian does not treat the horse until he has the medical records, which may be within 1 or 2 days, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so if 5 days is the maximum, but if it's being treated, they have to have the records right away.
And as you can imagine, particularly in the on-track environment, the veterinarians that are first licensed by you and then licensed by us, they work their day in and day out. So the transfer of the records, the 5-day window is certainly enough time. I'm guessing that practice will be more along the lines of 1 or 2 days.
So this isn't too arduous of a thing to do, ask them to do.
Not at all.
This should be pretty easy. So-
We've described the resistance among trainers. We don't have that kind of resistance, at least not from veterinarians.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. So call for the vote.
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez,
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo,
Yes.
Kathy Bowler,
Yes.
Judy Mancuso.
Yes, but I don't want it as seen as I'm a proponent of horse racing, just a proponent of the records getting changed for the
Yes,
record.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.
moving on to 7B2, adopt position on the CDFA proposed regs. This is relating to SB 27 on livestock drugs.
Yes.
And maybe Phil, if you could introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So, good morning, board members. My name's Phil Laird. I'm the Deputy General Counsel for the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. And Anne Marie invited me to appear today to give a little bit of background on SB 27 and
Okay, how about, I just want you to introduce yourself. We'll let Anne Marie
Yeah,
go
even
first
better.
and then we can, yeah.
Quick announcement, the actual language was published yesterday and has now been noticed, and the final comment period ends on March 22nd. So February 20th to March 22nd is the official comment period for the CDFA proposed regulations regarding medically important antimicrobial drugs. Just a bit of history, and I won't belabor this. We've commented on the regulations that were initially published by the California Department of Food and Ag. And in your packets, we have the board's comments to those regulations. And there were a number of items the board was particularly concerned about in the regulations that really dealt with some duplication issues, some inconsistency in the who was authorized to dispense these drugs, the oversight of the individual who was authorized to dispense these drugs. There were some labeling issues that we found inconsistent. And just as a general comment, we didn't feel that the regulations provided for sufficient a financial endeavor, if you will, so that if there were problems with compliance, the CDFA would have enough money to enforce that. And that's something they have to work out, but it was just a general comment from this board. Since that time, the CDFA, along with the governor's office, the Board of Pharmacy, the Veterinary Medical Board, and most recently, Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, participated in several discussions about the intent of SB 27 and creating a prescription for medically important antimicrobial drugs that are used in food animal. One of the, I would say, parent policies of SB 27 is that veterinarians will no longer be using these medically important antimicrobial drugs in a regular pattern of use. They have to be medically indicated either for prophylactic, preventative use, or to treat disease that is diagnosed. In that spirit, these regulations were created with a focus on access. Apparently, the CDFA has heard from the community, the industry, that there is a lack of access to these medically important antimicrobial drugs now that they're on prescription only. And they've created a new category. Well, this category existed prior to the implementation of SB 27. However, this category of a restricted livestock drug retailer was not allowed to dispense prescription drugs. They were allowed to sell things like medicated shampoos and things that did not require a prescription but had some level of medication in them. This is a pretty drastic change in that this regulatory proposal would allow these livestock drug retailers to, in fact, sell these limited medically important antimicrobial drugs. And I forget the actual number of them. I think it's 7, but I may be off by 1 or 2. The board has expressed its concerns with having a non-licensed healthcare provider, that would be a non-licensed pharmacist or pharmacy tech, filling prescriptions that are written by a veterinarian and given to a client to fill. However, there has been a ruling from the governor's office, and I'm only going to go so far, and then I'm going to turn it over to Phil, that the intent and spirit of SB 27 because these prescriptions are only deemed prescriptions in the state of California and are not prescriptions as defined by federal rule, that there is some, there's a pathway, if you will, for this new category to dispense medically important antimicrobial drugs that are not pharmacies or pharmacists. There are pharmacists involved in this layer, whether through consulting or management. These individuals would have to be trained to dispense these medically important antimicrobial drugs. And the new version of the regulations that are in the packet today did take into consideration the board's comments and some comments that were submitted by the Board of Pharmacy. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Phil and have Phil fill us in on what he knows about this and open the board up to comments.
So again, thank you for having me, and I may be slightly redundant with a few things here, but just following on what Anne Marie had to say. As we know, SB 27 was signed by the governor back in 2015 and continues to be some of the more progressive legislation in this country on the issue of curtailing the overuse of important antimicrobial drugs in livestock. And since that bill, again, as Anne Marie alluded to, CDFA has been working with a number of parties, including your board and the pharmacy board, to draft and implement appropriate regulations to carry out the provisions of that bill. Since your board's comments in August, the governor's office has hosted and facilitated a number of meetings between CDFA, pharmacy board, your board. I believe Anne Marie's attended a number of those meetings. And the goal has always been to address the concerns raised by your boards and the other stakeholders while still implementing all of the elements that are provided for in the legislation. As you're aware, and as Anne Marie alluded to, a component of the law provides for restricted livestock drug licensees having the ability to fill these California prescription drugs. Understanding the concerns voiced by your board in August, it's been the goal of kind of the governor's office and everybody else involved to kind of thread this needle as best they can. And with that, I think you see now a set of regulations that have really enhanced oversight by a pharmacist or involvement by pharmacy, has enhanced the training requirements of anybody that will be filling these prescriptions. And it's a system that I think Department of Food and Ag has put forward as being something they think they can effectively administer and enforce. However, with that said, I just want to clarify that I'm not here on behalf of the Department of Food and Ag or the Pharmacy Board, really here to just convey that it's agency's perspective that these new regulations, we think, present a path forward to really carry out this legislation and get it going effectively in the state.
Thank you. I have some, I'm sure we all have some questions. I have some questions. And I would again like to express my concern that I think that only a medical person should be dispensing medication. This is fraught with potential for abuse. That I think Governor Brown was, as you said, he was very forward-thinking, very progressive in his desire to reduce the level of antibiotic use in livestock. It was outrageous how much was being used. And even when I went through veterinary school many years ago, I had a concern when I was learning about this. I was like, this has got to lead to resistance. And here we are 30-some years later, finally going, oh yeah, it might cause resistance. But going through these regs, I have some specific questions. So one, this license, can it be revoked? The license, the restricted drug license, if they violate, if they don't pay, if they don't, if they have a violation. It says the first violation is like $250 and the second violation is $500. Well, if they keep violating it, it doesn't say what happens after the second one. If they keep violating, can the license be revoked? And you may not know all these answers yet, but
And I appreciate that. I think
you
it's
may
a good
want to just
question,
take.
and I
Yes.
think that's one to be vetted, certainly with CDFA. I would assume with most licenses, right, that it could be revoked, but I think it's something that
it's
begs
not in here.
clarification. Yep.
Yeah, it's not in here. It says the records can be audited, and what is the plan? So the pharmacist is supposed to come in, quarterly, and is that the only audit, is just by the pharmacist? Is the pharmacist going to forward reports, or is the pharmacist going to only forward problems?
So also a good question. I think, I believe there's other portions in here that discuss CDFA reviewing some of
Yeah.
these,
So I'm like-
record keeping.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting, is there a regular review? Because besides trying to limit how much are dispensed exactly to farmers, to ranchers, there was a requirement, if I recall, in these SB 27 for the CDFA to have some kind of way to estimate if, or to try and determine if this is actually helping with the resistance problem. They're supposed to be doing some kind of survey or surveillance. And so that may be in a separate section, but it wasn't in here.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. And so is CDFA hiring more staff to do this program?
And again, I apologize.
Okay.
Not able to answer all these specific questions on CDFA's
Yes.
program.
So if they, if they're plan on hiring 2 people, I don't think that's gonna work. Yeah, this could be a huge deal. Also kind of more down here in the details, but on the first page, it includes bees as livestock, and on page, well, my copy didn't print out with page numbers on it, but it's under 5007, 5005, under definitions there, it does not include bees.
I noticed that too.
So it's about halfway back.
5007 what?
5007, and there's a space 5005, definitions.
Yeah.
Got it.
So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th, 6th paragraph down, it says does not include bees. And on the first page, it says it does include bees.
So Phil, it's on page 10 of 23. Okay,
Oh,
where
yours has page numbers.
Yeah, where it
Yeah.
says page numbers. And here, this copy has page numbers.
Yeah, the handout.
The handout
Oh,
does, yeah.
Right.
So,
this one.
I don't know what the difference in defining livestock under the definitions of chapter 2 versus the definitions that they have at the beginning of the document, why there is a difference. It may just have been an
Might have been an
oversight.
oversight,
Yeah, so, that's something that would be helpful to include in comments.
If a pharmacist resigns as a supervisor, then what happens?
I believe there is a portion in here that
yeah.
requires them to update any information and personnel changes like that extent, and I think
Right.
it's incumbent on the licensee to do that
But does that mean they
immediately.
cannot sell
in the interim.
in the interim until they get a new supervisor? That would be the best.
So.
Duly noted.
Yeah, and I think that was discussed at the meeting at the governor's office, that there's a reasonable time frame, and I want to say we were discussing 30 days, and it is part of these regulations that any change in personnel has to be updated within that amount of time. I don't know whether or not, I don't recall whether or not the provisions require there to be like a cease practice in the interim,
I
but
didn't see it in my
they do have
my
to,
copy.
yeah, they do have to update.
And I'm very confused about the label. So I don't know what page number this is. Labeling
Oh,
5010.
It's, yeah, it's section 5010. I can tell you what page number it is.
Oh.
15?
15.
So the actual,
Well, it gets reduced.
so it would actually be,
We might have different pages.
well, and you have a completely different page.
This is the one you sent me.
The labeling comes up here though.
Changes, you said no.
No, there's
Yeah.
not any changes from yesterday.
That's the one I'm removing, but then you do it.
So there was. Where did I find it?
We're not voting on this today, are we?
So the goal today is to really talk about the regulations because the board has an opportunity to comment on these in the 45-day comment period, which ends March 22nd. So you wouldn't be able to meet again. So you do want to either delegate that to your executive committee, which would be your president and vice president, to formulate comments to submit to CDFA during the comment period.
So anyway, after reading this, I'm still confused about labeling. And are you, not that I can tell you what page it is.
Are you referring to the crossed out portion for labeling?
Well, mine's not crossed out.
Okay.
Yeah, this is those.
5010, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I thought it was put in
Well,
somewhere.
it's not addressed again. So 5010 is now sales requirements. There is a labeling section in here. I have to find the section. There should be a labeling.
I could have sworn I read a label.
Yeah.
Cheryl, can I ask one more question? Are you going above and beyond your letter, other things that you caught? Or is this everything that's in your letter?
No, it's not.
So the
So
letter,
it's beyond the letter now?
let's make this clear. The letter was in response to the initial proposed
Yes.
regulations.
Okay,
Which those regulations were introduced back in August or July of 2017. This is a revisited regulatory proposal, so we haven't had an opportunity to comment on this one.
because we just got
We
it.
just got it, yeah. Because it
So-
was just released yesterday.
So what it needs to be done is Cheryl and Dick need to go over it and capture every one of these items and write up something because, I mean, we just got it. And everything Cheryl's bringing forward are huge concerns, especially the revocation. I mean, we know that these drugs right now are given to like every cow on the planet. And, you know, it's about giving them only to sick cows. And instead of getting it at local Joe's feed store, getting it from somebody for real, right? And bringing that all in to regulations and only giving to sick animals. So obviously we're not there if the list that Cheryl has raised aren't in these. So I'm not going to vote on this today to move this forward. I would only vote to move Cheryl and Dick forward to go over this. Can we do that? Can we just move
Can
to?
I just
Why don't we
finish
finish
my
asking
my
questions?
point so you can take this back?
Absolutely.
And then we'll see if anybody else has any other
Okay.
specific points.
Okay.
The label, yes. I believe that there should be a label, just like all the rest of the veterinarians have to put a label on whatever medication is dispensed. So that say that the commercial label that comes with the injectable bottle of penicillin or whatever is not a prescription label. And I think there should be a prescription label stating what it's for, how long it should be given, you know, if there's a withdrawal time, et cetera. So even if it's the standard dose, in my opinion, there should be a label. And then, of course, if it's off-label, then there's other rules for that.
Yeah.
If it's off-label, then the livestock drug retailer cannot sell it or dispense it.
Yeah,
So the reason there's not labeling requirements is because in order for this restricted livestock drug license person to sell a prescription, it can only be sold pursuant to the federal label. And so that's why the labeling requirements were stricken from the previous iteration of these proposed regs. So what instead that turns into is sales records. And that includes date of sale, name, address, telephone number of purchaser, signature of purchaser, and those records have to be retained by the restricted livestock drug licensee and for 3 years. And they also are provided to CDFA on per request. There's other ways in which if the entity that hires or that has this licensee wants to sell an off-label medically important antimicrobial drug, they have to have a pharmacist on site to do so. So that's just the clarification of the labeling.
Yes. I'm not sure how we got there. I was still what I believe. I believe every prescription medication in California, this is being defined as a prescription medication, should have a label. That's my personal opinion there, I guess. And the thing I'm really concerned about is the amount of drug that's going to be dispensed, since they can't break up, since they can only sell in the quantity that they've received. So this is the loophole. And so the retailer will buy a gallon when they know the farmer's only going to need 10 cc's. So then they can, oh, sorry, I can't break it up, I'm going to sell you a gallon. And then they're back to using it indiscriminately.
And this is something and I'm interested in, would certainly be interested in
So
looking
that would
into
be
as
like
well.
if, you know,
Would that be though in violation of the prescription being written to? Well, isn't a prescription required by the
There's a
veterinarian?
prescription. See, there is a prescription. And so I'm a small animal, but those would be like, you know, many of my drugs come in 1,000 count bottles. So that was like, okay, this dog needs 20 pills. Oh, sorry, I can't break it up. I have to sell you the whole 1,000 pills. And then you're going to use 20, and then you're going to use the other, you know, 980 as you want.
And I guess I'm wondering, is that permitted under your regulations and laws to fill
No.
a prescription greater than what the veterinarian has? Okay, so then
Smaller.
I think that in that instance, the licensee wouldn't be permitted to fill that prescription.
But that's that's how they're going to do it, though.
Okay.
That's how the retailer is going to buy a large quantity of everything and say, yes, Dr. Sullivan.
The real example is penicillin comes in a 100 milliliter bottle. And if this is a small producer who has one sick cow, he's going to be using maybe over the course of the treatment of the animal, if he follows the label use for 10 days, he may be using a third or maybe a half that bottle. So now he's got that antibiotic sitting there that he can use on multiple other animals without a prescription. And addressing access, I thought we addressed it in our original letter, but how is that an issue with online pharmacies that can get the drug to this rancher or farmer within 24 hours? Access is not an issue.
And again, I'm not going to come before you to necessarily defend the access point on that. I think, again, though, this kind of falls back to the law, that in the law it was stated that these special types of licensees are able to fill these prescriptions. And so, again, they're trying to accomplish that while still addressing this board's concern. I'm hearing some certainly valid concerns, and I think the comments being kind of generated here certainly should make their way back to CDFA during this process.
Yeah.
I have a question.
I do have one more thing, and because this does say regarding sales of restricted livestock drugs, that veterinarians are exempted from this.
Where are you looking? I
Well,
apologize.
the whole title,
Oh,
sales of restricted livestock drugs.
yes.
So veterinarians are exempted from this? Exempted from not having to do reporting. Of course, they have to write a prescription.
Yes, I
But
believe
they're
there's an
not,
exemption.
if the veterinarian sells the drug to their client, so there's no feed store involved, there's no pharmacist
okay.
involved.
Yeah, it's a
If they sell direct to their client, they're dispensing to their client. The veterinarian is exempted.
That would be correct, yes.
Okay. Just want to,
Yes, no.
Have that on the record.
This only is applying to CDFA's licensees. in this
Yes.
instance.
yes, okay.
I have a question
What,
for Phil.
yes, Judy.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for coming
Hi.
today. Has there been, could you tell us about maybe the stakeholders group that has put this draft together and who is involved in that maybe?
So I might actually defer a little bit to Anne Marie here, who is actually in the room for these meetings. I'm a little bit new with agency, and so I was not in the room for these.
Okay.
So we kind of covered it at the beginning. It was the Board of, as far as the state stakeholders, those agencies that would be involved in execution of this. It was the Board of Pharmacy, the Veterinary Medical Board, the Governor's Office, CDFA, and those state agencies got together to discuss the problems that we saw in creating a license type that is now going to dispense a prescription.
Right.
So as far as the greater stakeholder group, CDFA has held a number of meetings to get input from industry and those other stakeholders that are involved. Val's CVMA has been at some of these meetings. They're not specific to the regulations, they're specific to the rollout of SB 27, which creates a prescription and a tracking of medically important antimicrobial drugs in California, which is an advanced step of what the federal government is doing along these lines. So, to answer your question, Judy, the real stakeholders will, specific to this proposal, will that will happen during the public comment period and the hearing on these regs. That's when folks, just like they do with our regulatory proposals, that's when folks come together and say, we agree, we disagree, this is why, here's where we see problems.
And they're giving that to CDFA, it's their
Right.
45-day, and you said it ends March what?
22nd.
March 22nd.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
March 22nd, and it's CDFA, okay. On their website then, not
Yeah,
ours.
and I will send the board members the link to the notice. we
Thanks,
had as
yeah,
well.
because I definitely know NRDC is a leader in this, and I'm wondering where they're at with this, and if, like, are we looking at the Farm Bureau, Cattlemen's Association only side? Are we looking at the other folks that care more about the health of the animals, the planets, and humans? What am I looking at here? Because with all those missing pieces that Cheryl's listing, it's just not nearly cooked, right?
Yeah, so NRDC has been very involved in this whole transition
good.
and the implementation, obviously, of SB 27, as has Farm Bureau and the Cattle's Association and all the other folks that have an interest in this. But again, when you get down to this process, actually the regs, which
Yeah.
is, not the umbrella policy that the legislation and all the
Agency
hearings,
stuff,
right?
yeah.
The real meat and potatoes comes in when we hold the hearings and we open these things up for public comment. Everything before that is kind of construction work that we were doing with what we would call sister agencies. We were getting together and trying to construct something. My goal in being there was to help explain concerns from this board about the veterinarian being the responsible practitioner for writing this prescription and then handing it off to someone who could they have a conversation with this person about, how this drug is to be dispensed and applied. And that really spoke to the training of the non-pharmacy tech and the non-pharmacist as far as what if there's a question when the livestock drug licensee receives a federal drug that the label has not been altered. The client goes to pick up this prescription and the client says, well, my veterinarian said I should only be giving this twice a day for 14 days. And this label from, the federal drug label says I need to give it 3 times a day for 21 days. What do I do? This person is probably not going to be able to answer those questions. That's my guess. So that's some of the concern from the provider side of things. And, I acknowledge and respect that CDFA is doing their very best to implement SB 27. And I think we need to keep in mind that all of us want that because this is what's responsible for controlling, the overuse and overprescribing of antibiotics, especially in food animals and in feed. So let's not lose sight of the fact that the more we can accomplish, the better off we're going to be to get this law in place.
I just want it to be a model, to be the best it can be, and let California lead on this because that was Governor Brown's
vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is not leading right now.
So what we need to do is, I think, offer our, help and assistance to get this right, or where we see there may be some loopholes or areas that haven't been considered, and try to work with CDFA to improve the regulatory
It
product.
seems like it should even be under the vet board. Yeah.
Well, we don't want that.
So, as far as the stakeholders go, of course, the governor's office is the main big stakeholder, and what the governor wants, the governor usually gets. Our input into this, I think should be unwavering. There's a reason why we got into this state in the first place is that there's an economic incentive to overuse these antibiotics. And to think that just because an antibiotic is going to be properly labeled, those ranchers are going to follow the directions to the T is unrealistic. I'm not going to change my opinion that we should have oversight at every level just to play along with the game. I mean, our inputs only go so far, but I don't think that we should waver from our core values.
Dr. Sullivan?
Well, growing up on a farm, I can tell you what reality is because we always had these drugs available. You go into the farm fleet, the big box store, and their drugs are sitting there, and you'd pick it up and you'd read the label. And the reality is, if it said 10 cc's for 10 days, I know the actual work would be 12 to 15 cc's for 5 days does just as well because the symptoms are gone and that's all we really need to give. I agree totally with Cheryl that the labeling is the key, and we've lost a big component here because now the veterinarian has to write a prescription, and on that prescription is some really important information, and that needs to be transferred to that bottle of penicillin, because that has a lot more impact to the rancher. It would be to me on the farm than that label that is the standard label that comes on the bottle. It I think would have a much higher compliance level, and I think we've stated this before in our letters on this. But to me, that's the big fault of these regulations. I don't care who puts the label on. It should be exactly what the veterinarian has on the prescription. And that may require some education, but the label on a bottle of penicillin, which is a common antibiotic used and still important in practice and the derivatives of penicillin, what's on that label, number one, is really hard to read. It's really fine print. And ranchers and farmers, and I was just as guilty when I was 10 years old giving that lamb a penicillin injection. I think we can do better than that, and I think it's the label that transmits the importance of following the directions for that sick animal.
Kathy? I think you've mentioned it, but so all the enforcement disciplinary actions are under CDFA for the licensee and any kind of
specific type of
for
licensee.
everything. Yeah, okay.
Obviously, if it was an actual pharmacist or somebody who's licensed by the pharmacy board, they would be
Right.
falling under that.
Right, okay.
That
But any
definition.
problems, record keeping, any problems with anything that these regs require goes under CDFA.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
One last thing. I think Dick's example, while, family farms have gone by the wayside and now we've got farms that have, hundreds of thousands of cows on them. I can't imagine how CDFA is going to enforce this. And I know there's some reporting requirements and some enforcement mechanisms, but for those big, factory farms, we need a plan because that's where this is happening, en masse and affecting the biggest part of the population. And we have a lot of those farms here.
Dr.
So,
Sullivan?
thank you.
I kind of disagree with that a little bit in that, I should say a lot, because the large operations have veterinarians that are servicing those operations. They have the money to do it the right way. The people that are buying these products.
Yeah, come on, they're abusers.
Excuse
You know
me,
that.
The people that are buying the over-the-counter products are not the big operations.
I
They're
get
the
that.
backyard farmers, the small operations, and this is a big loophole for those producers.
No,
And
no,
they
I
produce
understand
a
that.
certain percentage
Right.
of product, but that's where I think where the focus is.
Well, there's a lot of abuse, though. And if we're trying to hone in on abuse, that's a much bigger issue and will come with enforcement. And So anyway, I just want
So
to
the
put that
big
out there.
farms you're talking about are dairy, and yes, that's true.
Oh, it's
But,
terrible.
as far as having large farms and going to production medicine, but there's a lot of small farmers out there yet that raise beef or, a few sheep or whatnot.
I mean,
And I grew
that's
up
who
on the
we're
farm,
making
too.
this medicine for is the cows right now, right? That's the statistics show. I mean, everything is going to the cows. So, all right, thank you.
So Phil, we thank you for coming. I hope you don't feel like a target.
No, not at all. And I just want to say I commend this board. It's clear your interest and passion on the issue. And I think I just want to kind of echo what Anne Marie said. I think California is going in the right direction a lot
Yes.
faster than everybody else.
Yeah.
And this is the process working.
Yes.
And so,
And I
I
wanna-
think your feedback's valuable.
And I want to reiterate that, I really admire Governor Brown for bringing this to the forefront, that this needs to be done. And I'm glad California is out there working on it because I know other states will follow us. But I think it needs to be done in the right way, and I'm concerned we're not there yet.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think that'll be known.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we need to?
Thank you, Phil.
So where are we now?
I would recommend this board, since it appears from all of the passionate comments that have been made today, that we would be interested in submitting comments to CDFA. And since that's kind of a working thing that has to be developed, that the executive committee that originally commented on these regulations, that being our president and vice president, can work with the executive officer to prepare comments and submit them to the CDFA based on what was discussed here today.
By what date?
It has to be done before March 22nd.
So by the 20, so if we had comments to give them, we should try to do it by maybe the 15th or something.
So what we can't do is have a serial meeting where each of the board members are.
No, I'm saying like if we submit it
It's still
to
a serial.
you and you could give it to them or something to include.
If you have a comment that you want to make, you need to make it here, because here's what's happening. If you submit an independent comment, then Kathy submits a comment, Jennifer submits a comment, even though they're not all on the same email, it's a serial meeting. So, right, one is piggybacking off of the other, and we're creating a meeting behind an open, not being transparent with the open meeting
Well,
act.
how about if Cheryl and Dick put together their comments, can they get it to the rest of us without it being, no, so we can't even see it. We're just saying, all right, you guys just go do it by the 22nd. Okay,
Yeah.
I get it.
You could do a telephonic meeting, and you could include
Right before
have
it's
discussion.
sent in.
Yeah,
for
that's an
instance.
option if you want to do a
It
telephonic.
might be worth it.
We need to notice that and
You would need to notice
notice
it,
it, so have it
and
by.
it's very difficult. It can
Yeah.
be done, but it's very difficult to have a telephonic meeting and take in everybody's comments. And you've got to be in a public location. The public would have to be available and be able
Right.
to join you at the public location.
Right, yeah, just like we did recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I just feel from the questions that have been posed today, I feel very comfortable with Dr. Waterhouse and Dr. Sullivan as a public member from a consumer perspective and from the health of the animals with their questions and their, especially things like, there's got to be a financial support for this and enough staff and the various questions. I would feel comfortable with them drafting the letter.
Jennifer.
To avoid a serial meeting, I'll make my one comment now. My only concern was the qualification of the person selling. I have, many moons ago, before I was an RVT, accidentally put a tube of terramycin ointment through the washing machine, so now it's Sunday, my vet is closed, I can't get more. Went into a feed store asking, can you help me, do you have terramycin? And the teenage girl working there said, no, terramycin is a powder that you put in the water. I said, no, terramycin is an antibiotic. Okay, I'm done talking to you. But my concern was just the qualifications, but I think the fact that it's prescription now is already a long step in the right direction.
Interesting.
Yes.
Do we need to make a
Do we have a
motion? Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that Dr. Waterhouse, Dr. Sullivan prepare the list of comments back to CDFA by the March 22nd deadline.
March 22nd.
Second.
I'll second. Sorry.
I
And
was
you
just
mean a
looking
letter,
about the date,
a letter from the vet med
Yes.
board, not a list of comments, okay.
Okay, any other comments from the board? Any comments from the public? Call for the vote.
I'm waiting to decide if Val's going to do this or not. If you'd like to, but if you are not prepared to make comments because you haven't reviewed this, that's okay too.
Valerie Fenstermaker, CVMA. I'll just keep it real brief. I have not had time since we just got this yesterday to review the entire document. But from what I've seen so far, we'll be sticking to our original opposed position. There are many, many issues which you've raised. We have additional ones, such as what happens with refills. The confusion that this will cause for both veterinarians and consumers when they see a big advertisement that feed stores can now fill their prescriptions. How a licensed, I can't remember the title of.
Livestock drug.
Restricted livestock drug
Licensee
licensee.
will know this is for food animals. And what happens when any consumer takes a prescription in and it happens to be for a small animal? How will they know that? There are numerous questions. I've been with SB 27 since the very beginning. Personally, I don't find this progressive to have someone other than a veterinarian dispensing or a pharmacist with all of their laws and regulations filling a prescription to have somebody else doing it. So I would say from the position of the CVMA that we will be looking at this very closely and writing a letter. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
really, to some degree, when veterinarians write a prescription, we fill out a piece of paper and we hand it to the client, our responsibility does not end. We still have some liability on what happens with that drug. And so when this is being filled by non-medical people, that puts us in jeopardy to some degree. And
Very
so
true.
that's why we have great concerns. Just one of the reasons why we have great concerns. And when the governor came out with this, I was so pleased. I was like, oh yeah, this is a great thing. And I feel like we've taken a step backwards. But anyway.
Can I might have missed something. I thought all the prescriptions had to originate with a veterinarian.
Yes.
But and I understand what you're talking about in terms of liability, but they do. Okay, yes.
Call for the vote?
Dr. Waterhouse.
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Dr. Nunez.
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo.
Yes.
Kathy Bowler. Judy Mancuso.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Should we try to do one more? I know, I'm waiting. It's not here. I have to go to the bathroom.
You want to take a break?
Let's take a short 5-minute bio break. Regarding emergency animal care to include provision authorizing our RVT to euthanize animals in an emergency. And if Anne Marie could introduce this.
I will. Okay, so if you, your packet is, sorry, I'm on the wrong page here. Your packet is under 7B, item 3. And at the last board meeting, the board approved these regulations, and we felt very confident that we were on the right track here, and I think we still are. Something came up post this language being approved regarding whether or not RVTs could then euthanize animals at a rodeo event or any other sporting event where there's not a veterinarian on site, but the animal is injured and is not going to recover and, in agonizing pain. Does this proposal authorize an RVT to euthanize the animal? And Tara and I looked at this, and we think there's already within the authority in section 2036 coupled with 2069, there is already an authority for an RVT to administer the controlled substance necessary to euthanize an injured animal. So why this is before you today is to confirm that the board's intent is in fact to allow for euthanasia on site by an RVT. And if not, that needs to be discussed, because right now with 2036 in addition to 2069, that could happen. That is permissible.
And so this would happen only after direct communication with a veterinarian, correct?
Correct, because it has to follow the provisions with regard to administering the pharmacological agents.
Can I do a little bit of grammar again? So this is under proposed language, 7B. The following task, it reads, the following task shall only be performed after direct communication. And I think the better grammar would be, the following task shall be performed only after direct communication.
Yeah. Okay.
So I wanted to just clarify a statement that just was made. The RVT would be able to administer euthanizing drugs after direct communication or under C, in the event that direct communication cannot be established. Then they can do it under the instructions of the responsible veterinarian for that rodeo or event.
Okay, with written instructions. Okay. Dr. Sullivan?
So does this in any way allow an RVT to perform home euthanasias?
Well, right now, if you have an RVT that is working for you and you're sending them into a home under indirect supervision, what are they allowed to do currently? Because if you are, let's just say you're at a regular vet practice and your RVT is going into and doing some home treatment because you have an indigent client, is there restrictions on what they can do now?
Well,
because they
that
can
I don't
transport
know.
the drugs now.
I know, and what I'm saying is, if we're allowing this to happen in the racetrack, I think the next level would be in-home euthanasia, which would mean that the veterinarian does not have to be present.
So
I think it needs
I
some.
don't believe they have to now, though, do
Right.
they?
I think this
Under-
occurs
what's this?
now.
Yeah, well.
I don't have personal knowledge, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I have concerns.
Any other comments from the board at this time? Comments from the public? Nancy?
I believe it's currently allowable without this regulation for RVTs to euthanize animals. I mean, there's nothing restricting it.
Right.
But I don't think it's allowable under this regulation unless you change the wording, because this says you can use drugs to manage pain or sedate an animal to prevent further injury, but euthanasia doesn't fall into that category. I think you'd have to have a separate statement.
Eliminating pain.
No.
Well, and not to be glib, but I mean, I guess if you euthanize them, you're preventing further injury. I'm not sure that was what we meant with that.
I don't think that's the intent. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I'm just
But
saying.
Yeah.
have to have that.
That will come up. That will
you-
come up, I
that would-
promise.
That would be a little twisted. I
Right.
mean, if the intention is to allow an RVT to perform
Right.
euthanasia, I think you should say so.
I agree.
Dr. Nunez?
I don't think I have an issue with this. I mean, it's not the RVT that's going to be making that call. It's the DVM. And
Can't be reached. It will be the RVT.
well, it also says that they can't be reached. There's going to be some written protocols that the RVT is going to have to abide by before making that decision. I think that RVTs are capable of doing that. I think the safeguards are in place to prevent abuse.
So under 7C, where it says, to provide treatment. Can treatment be euthanasia, I guess?
You know, again, I think that people would probably not agree that treatment meant euthanasia,
Yeah.
since euthanasia isn't really,
Treating
it's not treating anything, it's basically.
need-
It's
If that's our
specifically.
intent, we need to add.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
And truly, I do agree that there's nothing that prevents an RVT from doing that now. So if you want to be clear in emergency situations that that is also something that is permissive, you can add it. But it's unnecessary. I mean, I guess in some ways, if you're reading this in a vacuum, it doesn't say they can do it in an emergency situation. But if you apply the indirect supervision criteria to the general veterinary practice, it can be done. So it depends on how prescriptive you want to be in these emergency animal care regulations. And since there is some clarity issues, perhaps it's a good idea to put it in here. I'm just saying, even if it wasn't in here, I don't think that would be something we could prevent from happening based on what's in current VPA.
Jennifer?
Would it be easy enough to just add some wording to provide treatment up to and including euthanasia or something along those lines, just to be sure that it is covered? Because in emergency situations, it is very important to be able to end the suffering of these animals.
Yes.
It's emergency treatment, correct?
Yeah, but in-home euthanasia isn't emergency treatment.
Right, so that wouldn't fall under this.
But do we need to say that?
No. No. You don't. You're going to muddy this. This is about
Okay.
emergency treatment.
Okay.
Can I just ask Jennifer,
Yes.
are you good with this language?
I was.
Okay.
I always think I'm good with things until I hear the very astute comments coming from the rest of the board.
That's the way the rest of us are too.
Anything else?
Well, because I want to vote whatever Jennifer thinks on this one.
So where is it?
Okay, so do we have a motion?
Well, I think Jennifer had an addition, administration of drugs or drugs to manage pain or sedate an animal for examination. And I think, I'm sorry, that wasn't where you had the comment. It was about treatment. Where were you, Jennifer?
The very last line.
Oh, responsibility. Well,
That's
we may
just-
have to,
yeah.
because administration of the drug is where you're going to be administering euthanasia. So we
Yeah.
may have to include it up further when we're talking about why we're administering whatever pharmacological agents we're using. So perhaps you're saying administration of pharmacological agents to prevent or control shock, including fluids, and then administration of the drugs to manage pain or sedate an animal for examination or prevent further injury. And then you could do a number 3, administration of drug to end suffering or euthanize the animal.
I like that.
And are we saying administration of a drug for euthanasia, or do we want to say to end suffering up to euthanasia?
Up to and including euthanasia.
Okay.
Dr. Nunez.
So if the animal is clearly suffering and we can't get a hold of the veterinarian, they'll have to just wait, the RVT.
No.
You put that under 3, where it says the following task can be performed after direct communication, 1, 2, 3.
Right, but
And
then
then
C
C-
clarifies that. It says, in the event that direct communication cannot be established as required under B, the RVT can still perform those tasks, provided that they're under some sort of written instructions.
And that includes euthanasia?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to accept this language with the change that we just made to include. Do I need to
Second.
read it or just?
Jennifer seconds.
And I'd like to have somebody reread the motion.
So
Anne Marie.
so,
Sorry.
so let's start with B. That's where the changes are being made under 2069. The first change is the following tasks shall be performed only after direct communication with a veterinarian. And then we have administration of pharmacological agents to prevent or control shock, including parenteral fluids. Thank you. Parenteral. That's a new word. And it means what?
Injectable.
Injectable. Can we just say injectable?
No, say parenteral.
Parenteral. Okay. And administration of drugs or drug or drugs to manage pain or to sedate an animal for examination to prevent further injury. 3, administration of a drug or drugs to prevent suffering up to and including euthanasia. And then it goes on.
Got it.
So if this is adopted as a motion, we've got that long paragraph to read off. So when you're ready for the entire motion, I can read that.
So you accept that as the motion?
Yes.
And your second?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so are we ready for the long reading?
I think the public has a comment. Do we do that?
Public comment first.
Grant Miller, CVMA, and this might be a question for Ms. Welsh. In the first subsection, it's pharmacological agents, and then the remaining 2, it's drug or drugs. For purposes of clarity and continuity, should we just choose one or the other, and is there a legal difference between the 2? Thank you.
Off the top of my head, I do not know if there's a difference between pharmacological agents and drug or drugs. I think that, we're not specifically saying here controlled substance or controlled drugs like Section 2036 refers to.
Yeah.
So perhaps the board should consider whether or not you want to insert controlled drug or drugs, because we're talking about sedation as well as euthanasia. I don't know if those are drugs that are considered controlled substances under the Uniform Substances Control Act.
Not all the sedative drugs are controlled, but euthanasia's solution is.
I think pharmacological covers everything.
I think it does. Pharmacological agents includes both regular drugs and controlled drugs.
Is there a preference by the members to use either pharmacological agents or drugs?
I like pharmacological agents.
I do too.
That's all encompassing.
Yes.
So we can make conforming changes to 2. And then where we had numbered the number 3, that will say instead of administration of a drug or drugs of pharmacological agents.
Except for we better hear from Bonnie here. She's going to throw a wrench in it.
No, not a big wrench. I don't
Can
recall.
you identify yourself?
Oh, Bonnie Lutz. I don't recall, and I didn't really have time to look, but I don't recall pharmacological agents being defined anyplace in the Act. Drugs are defined. So it appears to me that I understand it's a more specific term. I get that, but it just, since to have consistency within the Practice Act, it appears to me that we should use the term drugs. And I believe it's, and I couldn't find it, the section that defines drugs or drugs, and it says that they're either controlled drugs or drugs that are prescription drugs. I don't know that we want to limit ourselves to that because some of them aren't controlled or prescription. So, since I'm tasked with looking at the definitions when this comes to be an issue, I don't know if we need to be more specific or less specific, I guess is what I'm saying, but the way drugs is defined in the Practice Act is controlled and prescription, I believe.
Controlled and dangerous.
Okay, I think.
Dangerous drugs, that's the term.
Dangerous
Thank
drugs
you,
are-
Dr. Sullivan. I couldn't put my,
So it is in the Practice Act. Current Section 2069 uses the term administration of pharmacological agents to prevent or control shock. So it is something, and I think that it is somewhere else besides 2069. So it is currently in the VPA.
But is it defined?
No.
I guess that's my point, is if it shouldn't be consistent so that we can look to another area to see how it's defined.
Is it time to add a definition?
I think people understand generally what a pharmacological agent is, that it's a drug, but I guess, and that's what I'm wondering, if
Yeah.
it's in the pharmacy code.
Oh, he is.
We can ask legal counsel to research this, and if pharmacological agent is further defined elsewhere, we could move with consistency in this section. If it is not, she can come back to you with a recommendation on why we may need to change the wording for clarity purposes within the Practice Act. That would be my recommendation to this board at this point.
Dr. Sullivan.
If we don't use dangerous, if we don't use pharmacological agents, then we're going to have to say dangerous drugs or controlled drugs.
Yep.
We're going to have to include both of them.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that Bonnie found this and not Tara. She usually finds little mistakes.
It's not necessarily a mistake.
I'm working off the cuff right now.
I think if pharmacological agents is defined by the pharmacy code, we just leave it alone. And if it's not, then we do our drugs and dangerous drugs and whatever is appropriate.
Right, I think that's a reasonable solution.
Do we need to change the motion to include whatever Tara comes up with to?
She's going to respond.
I think it's prudent to just report back at this point. I don't know that a motion can actually go forward because I think the board doesn't have enough information yet.
Right.
I mean, I think in either event, whether or not pharmacological agents is
Rescind the
defined.
motion.
Well, I was going to ask a question about what's our timeline on this? I mean, we've been talking about this for a while with MDC and things like that. So if we do what we're suggesting, will probably come back to us at the next board
In May.
meeting?
Yeah.
Oh, that's in May. Oh,
It's
that's
in May.
not far away.
And it won't
Okay.
really change what happens with
Okay.
this because we have a backlog of regs that are going through the
Yes,
process.
okay,
We're just
right.
now getting to the RVT education regs.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we don't need to amend the motion? We can
so
just
we're-
vote?
We're probably not going to even vote. It's
Have a
just a
motion.
report back at the next
Oh.
board meeting so we can get clarity on the language.
Well, wait, but that's going to delay it.
That's what they were just talking
Yeah.
about.
not that-
So
I gotta
In the
delay
whole
it.
scheme of things, it's not really gonna
it
delay.
won't delay anything.
Let's move on.
Okay, so we're rescinding the motion and waiting for an opinion by our council. Okay, it is a little after 12. How about if we break for lunch, an hour lunch? It'll come back at like 10 after 1. Yep. Okay? Reconvene this meeting of the Veterinary Medical Board, and there is an agenda change. We are going to go ahead and finish 7, and then next we're going to jump to 11. So let's go back to 7B4.
So this came out of the MDC, and it was a recommendation that Dr. Klingborg spoke of yesterday at the MDC meeting. This was something requested by CARVDA, that we move applying cast and splints from under direct supervision to indirect supervision. And the MDC is recommending that the board adopt this change and make this shift from allowing RVTs to apply casts and splints under indirect supervision of a veterinarian.
Any comments?
No, I'll move to make it happen.
Jennifer, you okay with all this?
I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
Woo,
Just wanted to
woo.
get your opinion.
Is there a second? Second.
Okay, second. Any other comments? Any comments from the public?
While I agree that it's a good idea to move casts and splints to indirect supervision, I have a concern that just occurred to me that by having this section altogether, it implies that these are the only things that an RVT can do under indirect supervision. We can do anything that's not listed under direct supervision and is not diagnosing, prescribing, and surgery under indirect supervision. So should this C be worded a little bit differently, or do we even need C?
Should it maybe say only an RVT so as to exclude veterinary assistants?
So let's let Tara weigh in here.
But an unregistered or veterinary assistant can administer controlled substances.
They can.
But that's mentioned elsewhere. So we don't really need this.
That's not true.
Okay, well, I would say that first off, let's just go back and note that this is existing regulation. And I think that was because they were trying to provide for administration of controlled substances, but making sure that the RVT follows protocol. Now we're just moving casts and splints from direct supervision down to indirect, because as was discussed previously, applying a cast or a splint is something that can be performed without direct supervision.
But what about all the other job tasks that RVTs can do under indirect supervision?
So potentially, casts and splints just gets removed from B. It's just a deletion
Right.
rather than adding under C. Is that what you're?
Right, and even administering controlled substances should be removed. I don't see why we need C.
I think C is important because controlled substances is a whole separate issue. And they need guidance, and I think law enforcement needs guidance as to what RVTs can do because of the Uniform Controlled Substances Act.
But isn't that mentioned somewhere else? In the regulation where it says that unregistered or veterinary assistants can administer controlled substances, doesn't say veterinary assistants and unregistered veterinary. I'm not clear to that. But then C should be worded differently. To make it clear that these are specifically enumerated, but these are not the only two things that an RVT can do under indirect supervision.
Does the board have any comments?
I want to answer Nancy's question. 2036.5, permit holders and veterinary assistants shall be prohibited from performing any of the functions or activities specified in subdivisions A, B, and C of 2036 of the regulations, except that a permit holder under the direct or indirect supervision of a licensed veterinarian may administer a controlled substance. So by moving cast and splints under C, you are restricting a veterinary assistant from doing it, but allowing an RVT to do it.
Okay, so then maybe it says only.
I don't think you need the only because I know what you're saying.
Somehow this
right
because
it feels like now
clear.
right, and it feels like now B limits you under direct supervision to doing two things:
Right.
apply cast and splits and administer
Correct.
a controlled substance, and that's not the
Right.
intent. I understand that.
Right. So, is there some way to fix that?
I don't know. Maybe.
This was a recommendation from the MDC. So, I mean, potentially you could send it back to them for additional review or move forward. I mean, I don't have, Dr. Sullivan?
Well, this is existing language, and it's just moving to a different category. I have no problem with the way it is. I think I understand it. I think most people understand it. I guess my question to Nancy was, are you saying that you're not having any problems with the direct supervision category?
Correct.
Okay.
Because those are the only things that require direct supervision.
Okay. So
if it's not on that list, we can't do it. I mean, if it's only these things require direct supervision. It's not on the list. It does not require direct supervision. That's why all these things are listed here. So then we get to C and go, well, if this list is inclusive, so might the list under C be
Well,
inclusive.
it's not inclusive, and I think other sections specify that. I mean, it wasn't inclusive prior to changing that item.
Right, but now it's bringing it to our attention. The more tasks you put on here, the more it looks like these are the only things that you can do.
Jennifer?
I see your concern on that, but to address the issue of possibly removing it, I'm concerned that removing it completely opens it up to veterinary
So then try
assistance.
to figure out a way to make it clear that these are not the only things, that these are specified for some other reason.
Why was this at the MDC in the first place, and why isn't it in the form it needs to be in right now that we should be voting on?
Well, because I
So
just
it
brought
was-
this up now. It just dawned on me.
Nancy, you're
Sorry.
slacking.
Okay, I still think we need a legal opinion here.
I would say that if we're contemplating removing C entirely, I would want to hold the matter for further research because I would want to look into the regulatory history as to why C was even put in place. So I'm not comfortable proposing to modify the regulation to strike C entirely. As for whether applying casts and splints needs to be listed now under C just because we're removing it under B, I don't think it does. I think potentially you're correct that, okay, well, it's no longer a direct supervision action that can be performed. But how does that, I mean, I would need to take a look at how that works with 2036.5, just to
Right.
make sure that we're not now opening up an action that a VA can do.
You would be, yeah.
Dr. Sullivan?
What about, to clarify, what about saying something like, an RVT may perform the following procedures, someplace put in, but not limited to the following, under the indirect supervision of a licensed veterinarian, but not limited to. and then
Including
list.
but not limited to.
Yeah.
Yes.
That would work.
Would that work?
Could you tell me how it would read now?
An RVT may perform the following procedures under indirect supervision of a licensed veterinarian, including but not limited to 1. Administered controlled substances, 2. Apply casts and splints.
That sounds good.
Well, are we now confusing what VAs can do under 2036.5? Because now we've got 2 listed, but now potentially there are many other things that a VA can't do because of the reference under 2036.5. Permit holders and VAs shall be prohibited from performing any of the functions or activities specified in subsections A, B, and C
Right.
of 2036, except that a permit holder under the direct or indirect supervision may administer a controlled substance.
Yeah.
So now VAs, we have no idea what VAs can do.
But we never have. We don't have a list of what they can and can't do. They can't do anything listed here except administer controlled substance. Everything else is open season.
Probably wouldn't use that phrase.
Yeah, I'd word it differently.
That's right. The regulation should say what they can't do.
Right.
Except for controlled substance administration.
You okay with that, Tara?
We can try it.
But it's been that way forever.
Well, no, it's not. It's very clear that VAs are prohibited from performing anything under C. Now, if we add including but not limited to, what is that? Not limited to is unlimited. So now VAs can't do anything because potentially it could fall under but not limited
It has to be
to?
worded that the specific things that are listed here are the things that they can't do.
So,
but then it says controlled substances, which they can do.
Dr. Nunez?
So legal counsel said that she would like to research the history of why C was put there, I say we go with that and move on.
Yeah.
That appeared at the same time that .5 appeared. That didn't used to be there. We never had a C. Controls, it was just another one of the job tasks that RVTs could do. When 2036.5 came along, it specifically said that veterinary assistants could administer controlled drugs under direct or indirect. It was then put in here to make it clear that so could RVTs. So that's quite recent.
Right, and the most recent version was adopted in 2016, probably in connection with the VACSP
Right.
legislation.
We never had a C before.
Right. So I want to be very cautious about what we're doing because I don't want to start limiting all the tasks that a VA can do.
Right.
Just because we're changing
Right.
the list for
And neither do we want to limit
RBTs.
what an RVT can do by listing only 2 things.
Right, right. So my recommendation would be to hold the matter while I research C for regulation history, potentially also take a look at 2036.5 and that history, and then see if there's a way to craft the limitation for VAs so that it's not all-inclusive or unlimited.
Sounds
Okay.
reasonable.
Okay, so do we have a motion?
Well, I mean, what happened to it? It got obliterated, I think,
I think the
here.
motion is to ask legal counsel to do a little bit of research on why C was put in there. What was the intention of C?
Okay, thank you,
Come
Doug.
back with us to us.
So he's motioning now to,
We didn't have a motion before.
no, he was just suggesting, discussing.
So I'm gonna take my motion back then, right?
Oh, that's right, I forgot, I think you did. that. Yeah.
And I'll second Mark's
Yes,
motion.
sorry. Okay, so we have a new motion from Dr. Nunez to send this to Tara for more research. We have a second on that?
Second, and
Yeah, let's
report
just leave it
back
at
to
that.
us at the next
Send it
meeting.
to Tara for more research. That's the official motion.
Okay. 2036 Animal Healthcare Test for RVTs is going to Tara for more research.
Does that need?
Maybe we should say
I don't
legal
think this is a
counsel in
motion.
general.
Board counsel. I don't
Yeah.
think that's a motion you have to vote on. I think you can just delegate
Okay,
that to
just,
board
okay,
counsel.
good.
Yeah.
But you might want to ask for comments.
Any public comment? Okay, moving on. Updates to adopted language for the CPEI. Anne Marie will go through this. Seems like I've been on this board 6 years, and I think we've been working on this for 6 years.
We probably have. That seems true for most things. The CPEI regulations have been adopted by the board, so I just want to make sure you understand these are really conforming changes. They change our reference and authority citations. There was some citations missing, and upon legal review, it's covered in that cover memo. So there's also one more substantive change to 2042A2. So if you want to go to that page of the regulations, which is the second page of the language, and it just changes it. I'm sorry.
I've got some clarifying comments on the memo before
Okay.
we go to the substantive changes, which I'd like to also clarify, if that's okay. So I just want to be clear what these changes do. They do not remove BPC Section 4808 from authority. So that is not included. 4808 will continue to be cited under authority. And then on bullet points 2 and 3, adding BPC sections 4836.2 and the rest, as well as the government code sections, those are being added under the reference sites, not authority. I just wanted to be clear about that. So now, if you want to turn to section 2042A2, that's where the substantive change comes in. And as this rulemaking package was being reviewed in legal division, we noticed that This language did not track the statute. It was overbroad. And the statute being Business and Professions Code, Section 4883, Subdivision N. So the revision is to remove federal government or the United States military because that's not in the statute. We're not trying to require disclosure of disciplinary actions above and beyond what the statute itself requires. So the new language tracks 4883 subdivision N, but then also clarifies that you also have to report disciplinary action taken by any licensing entity or authority of this state or another state or territory. Arguably, licensing entity is covered under public entity. It's just a clarification point. So in that respect, the proposed language does not go beyond the statute itself. I also want to just make clear that state or another state or territory is specifically the U.S. That would not be another country. Okay.
Any questions, comments?
I mean, I know it definitely would cast a wide net, but what if there was a federal offense or a military offense that would possibly pose consumer harm?
We would need statutory authority to require that disclosure. I think, I know, for foreign countries, there's a requirement for disclosure under the General Business and Professions Code, and there may also be federal agency and U.S. military disciplinary actions listed under that.
So if someone gets convicted of crimes against humanity at The Hague, it would be beyond statute for us to offer this person a license.
After The Hague gets finished with them.
I know, so what's wrong with changing statute then?
There's nothing wrong with it, it's just a different procedure. We just can't do it in this regulation. Because the board is effectively going beyond the authority granted to it under the statute.
Which the statute reads, disciplinary action taken by any public agency in any state or territory for any act substantially related to the practice of veterinary medicine or the practice of a veterinary technician. So that's what's currently in statute that we're making specific in this regulation.
So in another part of our agenda, we're talking about proposed pass for RVTs from foreign agencies to get licensed here, but on this part we're saying, but we can't take any information about legal actions or discipline that's taken internationally.
So they still have to disclose it on the application because I believe the application reads any disciplinary action. I don't know whether or not we would ever get, they're being fingerprinted through DOJ and FBI, so that's not going to pick up a foreign crime necessarily. So I don't think we would be getting that information now, even on subsequent arrest notifications.
Could Mark put that on future agenda item? Yeah, okay.
I have a question under section 2017, and that first line where it says, in addition to any other requirements for licensure, whenever it appears that an applicant for a license, registration, or permit. So does that include current license holders? Okay, so it's not just first-time applicants.
So the provision for current license holders is under another section of law that enables the board to seek a motion to it's called an 820. It's under Business and Profession Code Section 820, and it gives the board the authority to either request a licensee undergo a mental or physical or psychological examination if there's reason to believe they're unfit to practice. This specifically refers to applicants.
Okay, I just want to make sure we aren't missing them. Okay.
All right, well, if we do eliminate federal and military Does anyone anticipate that that's going to be a concern?
Okay, so Business and Professions Code, Section 141, authorizes disciplinary action against a licensee for disciplinary action taken by another state, by any agency of the federal government, or by another country for any act substantially related to the practice. So if we're talking about denying a license, then we'd have to link it up to, I think it's 475 or 480 for any grounds that that a licensee could be suspended for. We could do that. We just have to, walk it through the paces. So potentially, we could leave the federal and the federal language, but not the U.S. military, because that is not in 141. But then we just add a reference to 141 under the reference section.
But don't we have some provisions for recognizing work that's been done in the military to apply towards prerequisites?
Right.
Yes.
And so if there was discipline in the military, shouldn't we know about that?
Okay, so the reason those statutes exist is to help veterans get employment and licensure faster, which is a totally different question than whether or not they're competent to practice.
Well, like for example, if they've been disciplined in the military for animal abuse or something like that would not be reported if we cross out military?
I can look it up. Can I have some more research, please?
Motion to refer to Tara for more information.
I don't know. I'd just like to make a comment along those lines. This is very important that we get moving on it because there are some provisions in here, specifically the one that Dr. Waterhouse pointed out, where we don't have the authority right now to compel applicants to undergo a mental, physical, or psychological examination in order to see if they're fit to practice. And also, this gives your executive officer the authority to approve settlement agreements for surrender or interim suspension of the license. And I can tell you this has come up a couple of times where it's important to have that authority so that if there's someone that's an immediate threat to the public that's willing to surrender their license, that it doesn't have to go out through the mail vote and take several weeks and adopt. I would recommend if you want to revisit this at some point, maybe. I don't know that it's enough of a pressing issue today to hold this regulation. That's just my own recommendation. I think it's wise to put federal government in there because we do have veterinarians that work in the federal government, and you can just simply add the authority citation of 144, 141.
Yeah, it's we would be adding citation under reference to 141.
Okay.
And I can also read the additional language specifically. I mean, I think we need to tweak what we had before so that it is any public agency in any state or territory or by any agency of the federal government or by another country, comma, or any licensing entity.
Mm-hmm.
So we can leave federal and cross out military without changing statute.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Then that's what I would motion.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
Okay, so let me read the motion.
Yes, let's read it so we get this clear.
Do we have any
Yes.
public comment?
Any public comment?
Okay, the motion is to approve the proposed regulatory changes as modified, direct the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, authorize the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package, notice the proposed text for a 45-day comment period, and if no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, adopt the proposed regulatory changes as modified.
can you read them as modified?
Read them one more time as modified.
Mhm. So the modifications that the board, that is included in the motion are only to section 2042, subdivision A, paragraph 2, that will read, any disciplinary action taken by any public agency in any state or territory or by any agency of the federal government or by another country or any licensing entity or authority of this state or another state or territory. I also need to add country to licensing entity, because I don't believe the federal government doesn't license, they rely on state licensure. But the military itself would take disciplinary action, not a federal licensing agency. So it would read, or any licensing entity or authority of this state or another state or territory or foreign country.
Okay, Dr. Nunez, that's okay with
There you
the
go.
motion? As
Yes.
That sounds great.
Okay. Any other discussion by the board? Now that we have it fully read, any other discussion from the public? Call for the vote.
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, we're moving to agenda item number 11. Possible board action to adopt positions on legislative bills and proposals. A, Assembly Bill 1776, the emergency medical transportation, transport of police dogs.
So we have a bill in your packet that's sponsored by Assemblymember Steinerth, and we just recently, we've had another Ledge Council language change that was provided to the board. I think we may have members of the public that would like to address this bill, if that's okay with you at this
Yes.
time. Okay, please come forward.
Is there any-
I can take it and hand it to the board, thank you.
Hello. I'm Cody with Assemblyman Mark Steiner's office, and this is Mike Mioli, who will be speaking as well. We have a few more guests, but they'll probably speak during the public comment period.
Yeah, my name is Mike Mioli. I'm currently a firefighter, paramedic, tactical paramedic, San Diego Fire Department, San Diego PD, SWAT, Secret Service, and a bunch of other agencies that we give tactical medical support to, including a lot of canine units. And former SEAL operator chief and advanced tactical practitioner in the Navy, where we do not just treatment on humans, but as you may know, there is some training for canines, horses, poker models, and some other things that we do some treatment on, always under the supervision of a licensed veterinary medical doctor. And so the purpose of the bill, as you can see, is to provide some additional changes to the laws that would allow different levels of responders, whether they're police officer, first aiders, or EMTs, or EMT2s, or paramedics, to be able to use their human scope of practice on a canine, given proper training under DVM's personal, being the medical director of the training program. We find that that would be essential, like it is in other states. We wouldn't be reinventing the wheel here in California. This would be similar to Colorado, does some similar things. Initially, when we started this and approached, I think it's Ethan Mathis here at the board, We were just looking at law enforcement canines, working badged canine officers who require a couple $100,000 of training, and they are frequently injured because they do more dangerous things than regular police officers do. We just had one in San Diego last month, or actually last week, get stabbed, evisceration, all that kind of stuff. All an officer can do is put them in their car and take them to a veterinary hospital. So we are in support of both AB 1776 that talks about the transport of these these law enforcement canines to veterinary hospitals by ambulances in the state of California. It would require a change of law to do that, and it would still require the agencies in those various areas to agree to do that. But they can't agree to do that right now because it's not part of the law. You'll probably have another Senate bill in front of you that we also support. It's more broad. It covers dogs and cats and pets and things like that. As a firefighter, I wish I could say I drug out a human ever out of a fire that survived, but I can say I've taken dogs and cats and we do treat them. We give them oxygen, we give them all these kinds of things. Apparently that's not under state law. Those of us that do that, it's kind of crossing a T, dotting an I in the Senate bill that Senator Glazer has put together. That would definitely be something we also support. But for the specific treatment, he in his bill, you'll see, just has basic life support, such things as oxygen, bandaging, things that we do already. Whereas in what we're asking for is a change in the law, and we already presented it to the EMS authority here in Sacramento, and they can't do anything until you move first. So that would require this change that would allow us to be able to treat law enforcement canines with an ALS scope of practice, including sedation, starting IVs, fluid resuscitation, needling a chest and tension pneumothorax, and the kinds of emergencies that we see but we can't treat. And these officers think we can, and we really can't. So with that, I'd like to invite Dr. Lori Martin, who is one of the instructors for a 5-day training program that I coordinate. There's many training programs throughout the country, and some of them here in the state, where they teach ALS life support on canines, but we have to tell them after every class it's not in your scope, so it's kind of nice to know information. So with that, Dr. Lori Martin, if she could approach the council.
Sure. Go ahead.
Hi there, Dr. Lori Martin. I'm owner of a veterinary hospital in Santee in East County, San Diego. And after 9/11, I had a paramedic, urban search and rescue paramedic, approach me and say, you know, there was a dog that had collapsed and we didn't know how to treat it. The veterinarians weren't there. VMAT wasn't there yet. And he said, we want to learn how to treat these dogs. So initially I actually got started teaching classes on the search and rescue dogs. And then later when I met up with Mike and he was talking about treating these police dogs who were injured in the field, I said, yes, I'd love to. It would be awesome if we could have somebody who could treat these dogs before we get them to the hospital. I mean, they load them up in the police car and get them there pretty quickly, but if there's something they can do for them that could potentially save their life out in the field, these paramedics that I've worked with are awesome. It's amazing what they can do to save people, and just it doesn't take much to teach them the differences in the anatomy and physiology. And hey, where do you find a pulse on a dog? You know, and treating and teaching them the drug dosages. And I've been doing this I've been teaching CPR and basic emergency and critical care out in the field. But of course they can't use it, and so my goal is to hopefully get the approval for the police dogs that when they do get stabbed and shot, and the other things that happen to them, heat stroke is a big problem with the police dogs, and if they could at least get their treatment started in the field, once again under the same scope of practice that they can do for a person, I think that would just be a awesome thing to do for these dogs, and if they could save their lives, and these dogs put their lives on the line to keep us safe, and if we could do something for them out in the field, and these paramedics are so good at what they do. It really doesn't take much to teach them the differences between treating a person and treating a dog, and especially since it's not like they have to learn all the different breed specifics, and they're not having to learn cats and dogs and the different specifics there. It's mainly your Shepherds, your Malinois, and they're all about the same size, and so it's really a pretty easy thing to train. So I'm hoping that we can get approval for that, so we can potentially save these dogs. That I know in 2015 there were 26 deaths, police dogs in California, and I wonder how many of those could have been prevented if they could have treated them in that first 5-10 minutes out in the field. Thank you.
So just to summarize, the bill we're currently looking at, AB 1776, currently only would allow for transportation by EMT 1s, 2s, and Ps to a veterinary facility. What we're looking at possibly, and you'll see in your packet, is also dealing with scope of practice, and that's why we're here today, because we wanted to look to the veterinary board on scope of practice to potentially allow EMT 1s, 2s, and Ps to also treat animals, how they in the same scope that they would treat a human in an emergency situation as they transport them to the veterinary facility. So currently the bill only deals with transportation, but we wanted to come to you to look for guidance on also treatment, emergency treatment in the situations. But I also want to finish with one more guest who teaches classes on this as well. If you want to come up.
I have some handouts here. I apologize, there's not enough for everyone. We flew up from San Diego this morning. But anyway, distribute those however you
For Pete, because he's a former tactical paramedic, SCDA fire, and he's watching. And now he's the.
I'm going to have to ask you to stop because you're not on mic, so it's not being picked up by the webcast. So we'll allow the guest to introduce himself and then present from there. Okay, thank you.
Okay, hello. My name is Pete Ordilli. I am currently the program director for Palomar College. The reason they asked me to come up here, I think, is obvious for the training portion of it. I'm retired fire department, police department with Escondido Police Department Special Weapons Team. Was also on the Urban Search and Rescue Team, Task Force 8, California, which is deployed to New York, and also Sheriff Search and Rescue Team. So I've got a lot of experience working with these dogs directly. And I'll tell you, we share the same passion for these animals that you folks do. The reason that I'm here, again, is partially because of the training. I don't know if you have the handouts in front of you, but if you look at the handout that's marked 2015 at the top, and it talks about the TECC group, it talks about the main killers of dogs. And the three areas really are motor vehicle accidents is number one, heat-related number two, and the third one, I forgot off the top of my head, penetrating gunshot wounds to the chest. And these are three areas that we actually are very involved with in treating on human beings, and we can make a huge difference on the dogs as well. Dr. Laurie mentioned some of the treatments that are out there and available. Our scope of practice in San Diego County goes all the way from basic life support, all the way to advanced life support, and up to paramedic. We have practiced these skills. We've done these, performed these on the dogs successfully, and we've seen the results of these. This has been done in the military for years and has been proven that it works. It can work in the civilian sector as well. If you look at the training material, first of all, look at the K9 where it says 2017-2018 K9 Medic Program Overview. If you turn to page 8 on that section, it kind of breaks down a real simple class on how this is actually being taught. And the reason we bring this up, there's going to be all different levels of responders working. For example, if we go to a call and a K9 receives a gunshot wound and there's a basic life support, that group would be administering only the care that they're allowed to per that level. If they get treated by a paramedic or transported by a paramedic group, they could receive additional advanced life support on there. So if you look at page 8, it kind of outlines what the training would entail. We've broken that down into, according to the level of response, a 4-hour block, a 1-day block, a 2-day block, and a 3-day block. And this is all related to canine care under the supervision of a veterinarian. So this is very important. The other section I'd like you to take a look at is the one that looks like this, curriculum summary. If you can take a look at that. This is how the training is broken down into modules. Keeps it very simple, but you can see it keeps in line with the standards that are set up by the Tactical Emergency Casualty Care Canine Division Working Group, and actually covers every section that's in there. So again, there's modules, 3 pages of modules on there, going from very basic life support, going all the way up to very advanced life support, including surgical crikes. Again, all this training is under the direction of the veterinarian. This has been done at different labs with the military under veterinary and has been proven to be life-saving. So again, we really truly share the passion for these canines that you do, and we want to make a difference. This should have been done, and I don't want to offend anybody, but this training has been out there for about 10 years, and there is no reason where we can't provide these animals the same care that we're providing humans and try to improve their long-term outcomes. So thank you for listening to me, and we'll be available for any questions afterwards. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much.
So I'd like to thank you for all you do to try and keep our families safe,
Thank you.
whether they're people or animals.
Thank you very much.
So we're really being asked for two things here. One is a position statement on AB 1776. That's the first order of business. Any comments?
I guess let me first off by saying that I love police dogs, I love police officers, and you guys are doing great work. But I did have some questions. So you have some categories of EMT1, EMT2, EMTP. I'm not exactly familiar what the difference is between those
That's
guys.
not part of 1776, right?
Yes, it
It
is.
currently, that's for transport.
Yeah.
That's just for transport.
Yeah.
1770 is just transport.
But
Oh, we're talking-
MT1s,
we're
2s,
talking
and
about
Ps
the
would
other
be able
one.
to transport.
Okay. So
It's different. Should I answer now? I'm not familiar with it.
Go ahead, you can answer.
Okay, the EMT 1, 2, and then paramedic are different levels of care. The EMT 1 is basic life support, which would mean they would put on pressure dressings, they could put on tourniquets, they could provide oxygen, but there would be no IVs, no IOs, no medications administration, no surgical crikes. It'd be very basic life support, the same as it is on the human side. The next level, level 2, is kind of what we call an advanced EMT, which they would be able to do a few more advanced things. They may be able to start an IV and give 1 or 2 meds or something. But the level, the paramedic level is the most advanced, and depending on which portion of the state that you're working at, can be very, very advanced. In San Diego County, we carry about 28 different drugs, but we also treat pediatric patients, and the dog sizes actually correlates just almost identical to the pediatric drug chart that we use, because it's all based on kilograms, milligrams per kilograms, and that kind of thing. So the paramedic level is advanced airway, which includes ET intubations, possibly surgical crikes, King Airways, the 26 different medications, the IV fluids, IOs, tourniquets, all the advanced things that they would be receiving on a regular trauma patient or a medical patient. So we can treat that heat-related by giving them a 500 cc fluid bolus between. So anyway.
but all this training that you originally get to achieve these different levels is for humans, correct?
We already have that training. What we're trying to do now is
So,
if this
yes, and so what you're asking is, once you have that human training, you go through this other course that's overseen by a veterinarian, and that will qualify you to practice on animals?
Correct, at the level that you're trained to.
Because we've had some discussions with physical therapists kind of trying to say the same argument, that, you know, since they're so versed on human medicine, that it's a simple transition to go from human medicines to practice on veterinarians. I think the difference is that, on animals, not veterinarians. The difference is that I do appreciate is that you do have, who is this other veterinarian that?
Lori.
Lori Martin.
So she has developed this training?
This is the training that we're doing with our college. Palomar College is offering this in May.
Who made that training, though?
What's
Who
that?
developed this training?
The information is inside. Joanne is the director of this program. If you look on the Tactical Emergency Casualty Care website, which is TECC, if you look on the top 2 or 3 reputable companies that teach this, this is the top in the top 3.
Yeah, when we have trainings for veterinarians and for RVTs, we have oversight as far as how that training, there has to be certain standards, accreditation standards and so forth to ensure that they're trained properly. Is there any accreditation standards for this training that you've developed?
The intent for this is to become, and Mike, you can step in there, be post-approved, which if you're familiar with law enforcement, that has to be, the committee comes in, watches the training that you're providing, and then will say yay or nay. Mike, you want to address?
I want to clarify as well before.
There is no certifying body for this right now. CTEC, if you look up CTEC, the Committee on Tactical Medicine.
Mike, you can't do it. You can't
Okay,
do this.
gotta be on
and
the
we've
mic.
also, we've
The
got an
mic.
agenda problem right now,
Yeah.
so let's
Yeah.
back up for a minute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're now transitioning into something that really isn't before the board today.
Okay.
What's before the board is 1776.
Right.
We have some additional ledge council language that's not in bill form that the board, we weren't sure whether this was taking on a new bill or whether it was going to be amended into 1776. So there's some confusion on our part as to what you folks wanted to do with 1776. I was under the impression that this language that I gave the board, this ledge council draft, was going to become a part of 1776. What I'm hearing from you today is you're going to do a separate Glacier bill?
So let me clarify. I'll
Okay.
clarify for you.
Thank you.
So 1776 is currently in the form.
Right.
What you have is potential amendments to 1776, and then I think in item D, you're also considering the Glacier bill. I think one question for the board is what is supportable for you in the terms of scope, or narrow, how broad is scope of practice? Because the Glacier bill is all animal, like dogs and cats in any situation. We are considering police animals in emergency situations, if that makes sense.
I'd like to
I
make
think
a
it's
point.
proper to talk about 1776 alone first.
Tara.
So our concern right now is that what we've made public is a consideration of animal transport. But within the packet that you handed out, it talks about transport and treatment and training. So I think there's a significant difference between those three items.
I think you were correct in trying to separate them into separate, and I think we can consider 1776 just alone first as transport. And then we wanted to bring the board's attention to a separate conversation of treatment as well.
So under D though, I just want to make this
Yes.
clear. That's in declared emergencies.
Yes.
So the provisions for the legislation under D talks about, when there's a declared emergency.
I believe that's the Glacier bill as well.
Okay.
In declared emergency, sorry, I didn't mention that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure we're not meshing two
Yeah,
different
no.
things.
Only
Okay,
declared emergency.
thank you.
Of
I
course.
think we need to go back to 1776.
Yeah, so if we can stick just to 1776,
Which is just transport.
yes, we should just transport. Yes, Dr.
And
Sullivan.
just,
I-
and just,
Dr.
please,
Nunez, did you get the answer you were looking
just
for?
please talk.
I haven't decided yet. I
Go ahead, Dave.
continue.
I have some discomfort by supporting or agreeing on a bill that is going to be amended. I get very nervous on what that amendment is, and our name is already on as a support, so I don't feel comfortable on addressing this at this time.
I think we should support it, and then we can do a watch, and it's gonna get amended. It could get amended a couple times, but I think out of the gate, this is a wonderful thing, and we should be supportive.
Kathy?
When I first looked at this, I thought, well, this makes sense, police dogs and transport and everything else. Now I'm a little more confused too. I'm beginning to think maybe we should hold until our May meeting on some of this, if you are going to be amending it. This
So-
is simple as it is,
Yeah.
generally, fairly simple, although, because there's no treatment, it's transport, if I'm understanding this first Steinnorth bill,
Yeah,
right?
and to clarify, this isn't necessarily like something we're for sure going to amend. It was more just we wanted to see what the board's consideration of it was. As it stands, the bill will stay as it is because there already is a separate bill working on scope of practice.
On the other
Okay.
issues.
And to be clear, so it's police dogs and search and rescue dogs and any service dog.
It doesn't limit necessarily, but it's mainly geared towards law enforcement animals. And I think when you talk about possible amendments, it'll clarify more what an actual law enforcement dog is. But as
Well,
it stands,
In the bill, it does define it. For the purposes of this section,
Yeah.
police dog, in
Yeah.
quote, means a dog being used by a peace officer in the discharge or attempted discharge of his or her duties and includes but is not limited to a search and rescue dog, passive alert dog, and service dog?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying. It might be clarified as we go through, but that's currently as it stands.
Bomb sniffing dogs and there's body recovery dogs.
Yeah.
But there could be a dog that's not associated with law enforcement.
Yeah, that's
It's
right,
just a, service
Sometimes
dog.
not directly. Fire departments also have working service dogs.
Yes.
But what we want to make sure is when we're talking about the advanced life support, we're only talking about a 30 to 60 kilo canine, not cats, not anything else.
Yeah.
That would be the Glazer bill, which is open-ended, but it's only for basic life support.
Well, I mean, but this says service dog, and that can be a seizure alert dog. Somebody's private individual with a seizure alert dog that could be a 10-pound dog.
Yeah.
I'm just.
Yeah, no,
For
and we want to shore that up as much as possible
Yeah.
because obviously the intent is police animal or fire,
Dr.
first
Nunez.
responder animals.
When we first created this a year and a half ago, it was originally just going to be for law enforcement canines, badged officers. But I'm a firefighter. I don't directly work for the police department, but we have service canines, and some of my chiefs that will just only care about the police
Gotta
dogs,
put
and
'em
care about
in.
our dogs.
Yeah.
We appreciate the intent. We're just trying to figure out all the details because that's where the devil is.
Thank you.
Dr. Nunez.
I'm in love with the idea of police dogs being in an ambulance with sirens blazing and lights going to get to the veterinary hospital. So I do support the concept, definitely. When it's being vetted out, I wonder if it could also somehow include, there's a lot of quote unquote pet ambulances out there that are not being regulated and might be a separate thing, but when we're talking about medical transport, at some point we should talk about
I
those too.
agree. Can we put that on as an agenda item, even if it's not in the scope of this? That's the second mark agenda item.
Well, let's wait till we get there.
Okay,
Yeah, let's-
write it
yeah,
down,
we're-
will you,
we're-
so that we don't forget? That's a good one.
We're working on 1776.
Okay, so I'd make a motion to support 1776.
With a watch.
With a watch, absolutely, but to come out with a support.
Jennifer? Support and watch.
I agree. I support the concept, and I'm very supportive of dogs in general, but I understand that these are officers. These are very important, and time can be of the essence. So after all of the amendments or whatever we're doing with this bill, I would definitely support it. So I agree with Judy on the watch position.
And so there's two different things, though. Sorry, Kathy. Support and watch are two different positions,
Right.
but you
Okay.
can support the concept.
Well, I think we should support, and then it's up to staff. Every time we have a meeting, staff brings an update of what we've watched, opposed, and supported, and we can change our mind. This is the beginning of the session, for goodness sakes.
Once it's supported, it's going to be on your agenda
Yes.
for the rest of the legislative term.
Correct, and we
Right,
can
so you don't
change-
have to do a watch on it. You
Right,
just do
we
a
can just say
concept.
support, yeah.
Okay, Dr. Sullivan.
I don't know if we're doing a support or a watch, but I would say that any time that you put a support position on a bill and you change your mind afterwards because an amendment you don't agree with, that original bill is going to have your name on it. So I think we need to be very cautious about supporting a bill that we don't know all the details in the final draft on. I would suggest, first of all, when I looked at this, I said, this is common sense. Why do we need a bill saying they can use a vehicle to get it to a clinic? I mean, that's just that's just ridiculous. So I looked at it as being a spot bill, and I'm a little nervous about that. So I support the concept, but I would be voting to watch the bill.
Kathy.
I'm on the watch side too here, just to start that. But question, because I, again, agree with the definitely overall concept. But the only thing, when I looked at this originally, I thought it was transport and life-saving or something, immediate life-saving, staunching bleeding, oxygen, whatever. But it calls it emergency medical services, and I don't see a definition of emergency medical services.
Which part are you looking at?
I'm at in your bill text. Who renders emergency medical services at the scene, da-da-da-da-da. I'm assuming that also applies to the animal they're working on, but I'm not sure. I'm looking at the bill text.
Emergency medical services is under the authority of the EMSA, which is not too far from here, and they operate under Title 22. And Title 22 describes all the things you're asking about. What's an EMT, what's a paramedic, what kind
Right.
of training do they have to have, and all of that. As well as public safety officers, like police officers. They also have a scope of practice for first aid. And so that would be the governing authority for us. But they cannot change anything for us until, actually, they told us at a meeting about a year and a half ago, we have to go before the Veterinary Medical Board for you to change your laws, I think it's under this Department of Commerce, or I'm not sure,
I know it, I think I
So
understand.
that has to change. For instance, transporting anything to other than a primary emergency facility for humans would be against the law right now in Department of Transportation.
There you go.
And I think I understand that of the transport, but I think what I'm getting confused at, and what seems like it could be open-ended in this, which is why I would prefer to do a watch, is it sounds like this bill would allow an EMT, or on whichever phase, 2, 3, P, or 1, EMT 1, to treat a canine in the same fashion as it could treat, as that same person could treat a human, rendering emergency medical services, and then also transporting that canine.
But only if they go through
That
a
training.
training program that has a doctor of veterinary medicine.
Right,
medical-
but, okay, I think this is
But
where
I
we're
think,
kind
yeah,
of tripping up
Tara,
here.
we're confusing things here, I think.
Yeah.
So the bill language in front of you in our packet is only about transport.
Yes, I know.
To a veterinary hospital. What they've talked about and what they have provided is Ledge Council language to amend the bill to also authorize treatment and training. So if there was a support, it should be very clear as to the terms of the support, the concept of transport, which is the bill in front of us.
Well, you could just say that we support as published January 4th, 2018, and then we can look at it at our next meeting as it goes through the process and see where it's at and deliberate it again.
And I want to clarify, the amendments are only for the purposes of the Glazier Bill. 1776 deals with transportation solely, and then the other bill deals with scope. And so I apologize that we've muddled that up because the conversation has been about
Yes.
both, but I just want to
Yes.
clarify. Today, we're only talking about transportation 1776. Our intention is to keep it that way, not to amend it. It's not a spot bill at all. The scope of practice purpose deals with section D, which is,
But
item
it
D.
doesn't in our agenda. So item D in our agenda is something very different than what you're talking about.
Right.
What you're talking about, we currently have under our public comments
Okay.
because we didn't have a bill for that yet.
That makes sense.
So what we have under item D is another bill there's potential for an author to carry that deals with strictly state of emergencies. So when there's a declared state of emergency, fire, flood, hurricane, whatever it would be, earthquake, that we can deploy veterinarians to be in those locations. So that's under item D. So I think that's why we're all getting confused about which bills we're dealing with. So just for the purposes of sticking to this bill, 1776, which if it's not conceptual, and this is the language, the board could take a position on it. Any bill that's introduced this early in the session has the potential to be amended. That doesn't prevent the board from taking a position. Once it's amended, the support only goes to the iteration of the bill that you took support for at that time.
Right.
Exactly. We only learned about that Senate bill a couple weeks ago ourselves.
Okay. And this,
What's
to be
happening
clear,
here,
is the
Cheryl?
Ledge Council digest the Ledge Council workup for 1776.
No.
The portion before that.
No, the actual bill.
Oh,
that's
this bill
before it.
that I
Yeah.
have, okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's what I was reading from, and part of it is, the digest is a little confusing on that. The bill itself, I think I'm a little confused on that, but I wanted to, the open-ended thing is not limited to search and rescue, passive alert, service, and canine officer.
Mhm. I think, Judy, you motioned to support.
I did a long time ago,
Jennifer
yeah.
seconded, but hers was support.
But watch, but they both said watch, so it was kind of confusing.
Well,
So we amended
my point was, we're going to watch it as it progresses, and we can change our mind at any time. It wasn't meant to be part of the status.
Yeah, from what I understood, we're supporting what's in front of us today.
Right, what's published in print, exactly. So yeah, it's still on the table here, my motion, with a second.
With a second, okay. Any other discussion?
No.
Any comment from the public? Let's start down here with the vote. Let's do it.
Okay.
Kathy Bowler.
Kathy Bowler.
Oh, come on. I mean, I am in support of this too. I think we just got off
Today,
track here.
what's in print?
At what time is it today?
Don't get crazy.
15.
Okay, you take it outside.
Well, it also does mean, I want to clarify, it does mean, it even includes service dogs, passive alert dogs. It must be in use by a police officer.
Right, that's my understanding.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's as language is now.
Yeah.
Correct, isn't correct.
Okay.
Okay, so it's only.
As it
by
is
use by a
right
police
now,
officer.
I would watchfully support it. No. No, I mean, I just think it's a slippery slope, so I just
Yeah.
want to say, if we're supported, it's as it is right now, and we have to reevaluate it anytime. And that means anytime there's material that goes out on this bill.
Yeah.
When it's amended in the process, which could be before our May meeting.
Right.
Which is.
Right.
My concern.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to?
So did I vote or not?
Yeah. So do you want to?
I was trying to get out of it, but I feel very comfortable watching this.
Okay, so
Sorry.
you're no
I'm back
to
to
the motion?
watching.
Because the motion
Yes,
is for
yes,
support.
I'm sorry. Yes, I
Okay,
am. Sorry.
so Bowler, no. Laredo?
Yes.
Laredo, yes. Waterhouse?
No.
No.
Just because I want to watch it.
Sullivan?
No.
Nunez?
Yes.
Mancuso?
Yes.
Okay, so
we're
it's
tied.
3-3, so doesn't pass. So does anyone
Can we
want to make
watch
a
it?
motion
Okay,
to
we
watch
have-
this
yes, we
provision?
I move to watch.
Substitute.
Okay.
We have a second.
Second.
Okay, Kathy seconded.
Okay. All right, any
Any other
comment on
public
that?
comment?
Okay, here we go. Bowler?
Aye.
Laredo?
Yes.
Waterhouse?
Yes.
Sullivan?
Yes.
Nunez?
We are all of this together. Yes.
If we
Mancuso.
have to, yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Sorry, you guys.
We
Wish
just
you the
don't-
best with it.
Sorry.
We're watching it.
We just know how
Well,
the
we can
politics are.
support it, for God's sake.
We know what happens at the legislature.
Yeah. We totally understand where you're coming
Yeah.
from.
Yeah,
Watch it, okay.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
We're watching
Thank you
it
very
Hopefully I
much.
didn't confuse you too much.
Thank you, first
Yeah,
responders.
we're watching it
We
supportive.
love you.
Then Sean.
Bye,
Bye, thank you.
very much.
Okay, good.
So I don't need this one, right?
Oh, which one?
Because this one.
C. Okay.
Well, unless, I guess 1753 real quick, let's just do that.
Oh, we've said that.
See, this
Yeah,
is
I
why
know,
they
but this
shouldn't
is
have
secures
put
now.
this in here.
Okay, we're moving on to
What
B,
this is
Assembly
gonna
Bill
do is
1753, Controlled Substances, the Cures Database.
So, there's a cures bill that is in the process at this point. This is really more for the board's information to keep an eye on it. At this point, I don't see that this bill changes veterinarian responsibility under cures, but I wanted the board to be aware of the cures provisions. Ethan actually learned of this through the Department of Consumer Affairs, ledge staff. So unless anybody has any comments on this, I wanted the board to be aware of the bill going through the process.
Dr. Sullivan.
Yeah, my question, I think I understand it, but I'm not sure. Does this mean that there are only 3 printers that are allowed to print controlled substance prescription pads in the state? Is that what this says?
I don't know that there's only 3 printers. I know that there is a specific prescription pad, and from what I understand, part of the problem that we've been having, or the veterinary community has been having, is they don't have these controlled substance prescription pads. The ones that are now the compliant pads. So they've been writing prescriptions on older pads and submitting them to the pharmacist, and the pharmacy is rejecting them.
Right, but it says this bill, beginning January 1, requires the Department of Justice to limit the number of approved printers to 3. What does that mean?
You know what, I'm not really sure.
I was also impressed by that statement. Wow, there's going to be 3 printers.
In the
Like, are
state
they
of
going to be
California.
gold printers?
See, I thought they
Where are
meant
they?
at minimum 3.
Well, I think they're talking about restricting the sequential numbers, so that's why they're
I would think
restricting
so.
it to 3, but
Yeah.
I'm reading into that.
Well, it does talk about the serial numbers of all prescriptions forms delivered, so I think you're right, a uniquely serialized number in a manner prescribed by the Department of Justice.
So it's almost like printing money.
Right,
It has to be done by these 3 printers.
right, and I read it the way you read it, I didn't really catch the printer thing, I was looking at the serial numbers that are prescribed by DOJ.
Yeah.
So,
Because
we
right
need
now,
to watch this, but
right now, there's probably, if you go on their website, there's probably 20 different printers in the state that you can get controlled substance pads from, but they're not necessarily all approved by
these guys.
Justice Department. So
DOJ.
I think that's what they're addressing, but I don't know.
So should we move to watch it?
I think we need to, just to
Yeah.
make sure that we understand the scope of the bill. It doesn't change right now a veterinarian's authority or responsibility, I should say, not authority, under cures.
I move to watch.
Okay.
Second.
I
We
mean,
have a
can I-
motion and a second,
can
Ms.
I-
Dr. Nunez?
I mean, I had a problem with just 3 printers. Like if one of these printers runs out of ink, then there might be a problem. There might be a problem with having access to controlled
Dr.
prescription pads. And, if a pet needs these controlled substances and you don't have a pad to write it, then that's going to be an issue.
There's too much fraud. These printers are giving it all away.
Judy,
Come
you're
on.
out of order. I think, Mark, Dr. Nunez, to your point, sorry.
Go ahead.
To your point, though, the pharmacy board is really involved in this and has a watchful eye because this absolutely affects the prescribing of these drugs and
Of
how it's
course,
prescribed.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But, if you also, on the other side, if we need those drugs,
What do you got stock at one of the printers?
if we need those drugs, I think we need to have access to them.
Right. And that would go for the medical board too, anybody writing a script.
Yeah. Right.
So
No, it's,
clearly, I
veterinarians
assume
are
there'll be a
right
lot of
authority.
play on this legislation before it.
I agree.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Here we go.
Any comments from the public? Okay, call for the vote.
Okay, I'm going to start this way. Mancuso,
Aye.
Dr. Nunez, it's a watch.
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, 11C, legislative proposal for protections for veterinarians to discuss the use of cannabis for animal patients. So we have a presentation by Dr. Payton. Is she here? Hello, how are you? Can you introduce yourself?
Of course. So, my name is Jamie Payton. Can you guys hear me okay?
You're going to have to speak up
I'm-
just a little for the webcast.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Jamie Payton, I'm a California licensed veterinarian since 2008. I'm also a board certified critical care specialist for small animals and currently the chief of the integrative medicine service at UC Davis Veterinary Medical Teaching Hospital. And in that service, we really specialize in, or we take care of animals, specifically small animals, but all different species, and focus on their pain management as well as improving quality of life. Also the Associate Director for the Center for Advancing Pain Relief at UC Davis Medical Center, where we're working on a lot of translational, meaning pain medicine that spans all different species. So with that background, that really brought up the issue of medical cannabis. And for the past 2 years, I've been working on trying to develop research in this area, which is actually quite difficult for those that don't know that. Being a Schedule I, as well as funding for this particular research is quite difficult. So we developed a survey that was proposed to basically look at several questions to answer. The questions were, what is the overall interest of pet owners in regarding, cannabis for their animals? Of course, what are, who are they giving it to as far as the different species? What products are they using? How are they, giving them to their animals? As well as, more importantly, what benefits and what side effects are owners seeing? And really trying to collect this information instead of having, an N of 2 or 5 cases. It really was to gather more information from a larger group of people, specifically our pet owners. And so what we did is created an anonymous online survey that we actually had granted basically exemption from our campus internal review board. So making that group basically make sure it's okay to go to the public. And then we opened the survey starting in October 2017. And the survey is still currently open. We'll actually close it at the end of March because we wanted to keep it open for 6 months to get enough information, especially with the change to recreational for adults this January. So with doing that, I'm going to present a few of the results that we've gathered so far. But I did want to tell the board, you have the survey in front of you, but the results are preliminary. The survey is not closed yet, and so these results are just sort of the overview at this time, but after the survey closes, we're going to be using our statisticians to go over the results more specifically, and then the goal with the survey is actually to then publish it, so we'll be able to get the information out to a larger range of people, specifically veterinarians. So our first question being, what is the interest of pet owners? Well, the response we've had so far, remembering that it's still open, is that we've had over 1,300 respondents. So we've had over 1,300 pet owners take the survey. With that, we found that primarily they are administering these products to mostly small animals. We found about 84% were canine, 13% to their feline pets, but the rest were ranging from birds, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, rabbits. We even had one emperor penguin, so there you go. The ages of the pets ranged from 6 months to 19 years of age, so quite a large span, as well as looking at breeds of dogs, since they were the majority, that where the pets range from as small as little Chihuahuas to Great Pyrenees and in between. What I found very interesting, of course, was we had the question, why they felt their pet needed these particular products. And what we found, the most common answers were that they wanted them for their pet's pain and anxiety. The second most common answers were seizures, nausea, and cancer, followed by other conditions such as autoimmune disease, diabetes, allergies, and heart disease. Now, this is the owner's perspective of what they needed. What's important about that question is that this is really very similar to what we're seeing as far as the medical cannabis uses for humans right now. And so we're seeing that people are interested in this for their pets. So out of this, the owners noted that 2/3 of the pets that they were administering these products to had been diagnosed with a condition. So meaning they had had blood work, radiographs, some sort of special test that confirmed a diagnosis. So of that, what was interesting is that 50% of the pets that they were giving were only on cannabis. So they were only on cannabis products and on no other medication for those particular conditions. And to me, that really speaks to that owners are reaching for these particular products, sometimes potentially in the face of not doing other standard medications. This is important for us to be aware of. In addition, a lot of 50% of owners noted they had not tried other medications that had failed them for this particular condition. So they were using the cannabis products, but hadn't tried something else that didn't work for that condition. If that makes sense. So what types? I thought, well, what types of products are owners using for their pets? Well, about 48% noted that it was a hemp, so a hemp product, meaning the cannabis sativa that's geared more for fiber. 48% was actually medical cannabis, so much higher concentration of our cannabinoids in per se. But 4% didn't know what actually their product was that they were using was made of. What was also noted is that while 2/3 of the products that were out there actually did list the ingredients, so owners could find them, they were listed on the product itself, but 1/3 of them, so still 30% of the products that the owners were giving their pets had no listed ingredients. So they did not have the milligrams listed according to the owners. This, I think, is really important because, of course, while owners are showing a massive interest, it's also showing that there is very little regulation and there's products out there that have no noted of actually what's in there. Most of the formulations that were noted were that 60%, of course most were oral formulations, 60% were oil tinctures, 12% cookies, 9% pills, the rest were edibles, vaporization, as well as whole plant. So quite a variety. They were purchasing them primarily from online suppliers, so about 40% was online. 20% was actually noted as in stores, so pet stores, grocery stores, other things like that. 20% was also dispensaries, 10% were noted from given to them from friends, and 6% were people growing their own. So as you can see, quite a wide variety right now that we have going on. All right. So the other thing to note that we found with the survey so far is that we did ask owners a question about the dosing. So what they were dosing or giving. And several owners were very savvy and wrote the particular milligrams that they were giving, but a lot wrote also how many mils, how many drops, how many droppers, how many cookies, how many puffs they were giving as the dose for their animal. My favorite components were, I will note that one owner described the dose they gave their animals as, I give about the size of a Sharpie tip. The other one was, I give a little here and there. So again, to me, this is telling us that the conclusion that we can come to is that we really do need more information about dosing because there is such a wide variety of products, as well as their owners are unclear, and as veterinarians we're unclear as well. And the majority are administering 1 to 2 times per day of these particular dosings, but it did range up to 4 times a day, as well as a lot of owners noted giving as needed. What the other question, of course, we asked was, well, who is recommending these dosings for you? Who is giving this recommendation? And 30% of the recommendations were from companies themselves that were selling these products. 20% were from friends, 4% were from bud tenders. So a small percentage for the bud tenders there. The rest of the recommendations were either that owners were finding dosing online themselves. They were asking rescues and getting advice from rescues, getting advice from pet store owners, pet store workers, as well as trial and error, and then also veterinarians were listed on that as well. So clearly we have quite a variety of people giving advice. So to me, one of the things that we wanted to know the most, especially when we're looking for doing additional research, is what are owners seeing as far as the benefits and side effects? Mm-hmm. And so the benefits, clearly the top benefit was pain relief, which was about 20%. The other benefits people were noting were a decrease in anxiety, improvement in sleeping for their pets. But most importantly, around the same, those were all about the same percentages, was that owners were noting an increase in happiness. So again, to me, we're definitely seeing that there is benefit, and owners are recognizing that there's benefit, but what are the side effects? So in side effects, about 70% of the owners that are giving these products noted that they saw no side effects. The highest level of side effects were noted as sedation. So I will say, again, this is very important data. It is observational, meaning what owners are seeing as benefits and side effects. We do have a level of bias because our survey was to ask pet owners who were currently using these products. So that is a limitation of the survey itself. But one of the other important findings that we found so far is that 2/3 of the owners that are giving these products to their animals have discussed it with their veterinarian. So clearly we need to be involved in this conversation. And 99% of owners said that they would support further research to actually know what we could do for our animals in this area. 99%. So again, these are preliminary data. We will finalize the data after March using our statistician to help us. But I think from what we've gathered so far, we know that there is definitely a very big interest by our clients, by pet owners. There is, a lot of public outcry for using it for humans, and there's actually a lot more research for human applications. The research area right now for us, for animals, is very, very limited. And part of that, as I mentioned earlier, is because the Schedule 1, you actually have to go through a lot of steps that people don't realize. There are some research studies that have been going on at other schools. Unfortunately, they are not allowed to be published because they haven't gone through Schedule 1. And you have to actually get the product to test from the federal government. You cannot use company-based products. And again, the other problem we're running into is funding. And so funding is, we cannot get grants right now, and most of the funding is from companies. But this is an area that we need this research. Owners want to know, veterinarians need to be part of the conversation, and we need funding to actually get this research done to help our pets and help our clients as well as veterinarians, because we need to know what is out there and what's going on. So I hope this information was helpful to everyone, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Whoa.
Okay, yes.
Did you ask if the people who are giving marijuana to their pets take marijuana themselves? Is there like a bias about them using it for their pets?
So technically, I can't ask them anything on the survey that would be particularly incriminating. That's why it has to be anonymous. So we chose not to ask that question.
Judy.
What about European studies? We were told in previous hearings, I can't remember if it was Australia or where, but somebody had an awful lot of data, maybe the UK. Is that out there?
It depends on the sources that you look. So
From universities?
There's not very much peer-reviewed data at all. Most of the accepted peer-reviewed data has been basically preclinical studies. So we do have a few preclinical studies, meaning studies that were not done on clinical patients. They were done on research animals. There are some, as I mentioned, in the US, there are some universities that are doing clinical studies. It's just that you really do, to do things right. I do think, and this is a personal statement, that of course we have owners that are seeing benefits. But we need to do things the right way and get this information to help them, and make sure we're doing it legally as well. So the Schedule 1, you have to go through a lot of hoops. It is possible. I've literally spent 2 years working on trying to get this done, and the end result right now is basically we're limited by funding. Also supply the one place we can get supply to do the research is University of Mississippi. It's the only federally approved DEA place that you can actually get cannabis. And currently there's a 2 to 3 year waiting list depending on what product you want to get. So we have been, we've been talking to them for a long time about getting it, but we are limited in how much we have to pay the government to actually do the research.
And just to follow up about one of the things that I've heard others, in the community talk about is appetite stimulation for pets. And I didn't hear that on your list. I was expecting it to be up on the top, but I didn't really hear it mentioned.
So it actually was, there were owners that did note that it improved appetite. It was much lower on the list for benefits though.
Is that?
But I will say, one of my theories about that is that the majority of the products that we have for animals are CBD, cannabidiol. And cannabidiol is not one of the cannabinoids that has been noted to be as good of an appetite stimulant as, say, THC.
I see.
So that may be one of the reasons we're not seeing that as a marked improvement or marked benefit, at least in this survey.
Okay, thank you.
So are you saying that you have reached approval process? You've gone through the approval process and you're at the point where you could do research if you could get funding, and two, if you could get the marijuana?
We have reached, so where we have gotten is we have done all the research for what we need as far as getting the Schedule 1, who we need to get approval from, where, as far as we have funding now to create, because to actually do the research, I have to get a safe, bolted down to the ground with a security system, with cameras, a specialized custodian. We've gone through campus to make sure we do all those things. We have funding for that. And we've talked with NIDA to actually be able to get product and how we go through that. Where we are, though, is we still would have to submit a proposal to the state as well as to get NIDA to approve a proposal as well.
And
so
NIDA,
that's still pending because I can't do that until
and
I have
NIDA
assured
is
funding.
NIDA is
Oh, I'm sorry, National Institute of Drug Abuse.
okay.
So they're the ones that
We're back to the
basically
feds.
control, yes. So they are the ones that control that particular grow at University of Mississippi. Now, the DEA did open up last year proposals
Yeah.
for other universities as well as other private institutions to be suppliers for research, but none of them have been approved so far. So.
Okay. Kathy?
Thank you. Well, I had a couple questions, but first, on the quality of the research, if you can do it, is there? It's kind of, it seems like I said before, catch-22. If you can only research federal product that is from Mississippi or whatever, and that varies with the commercial products that are available to the public.
Yeah.
Can you, in a quality way, with quantitative facts, come to some significant determination that A will be A over here?
Well, it's a difficult
Yeah.
situation. I mean, it adds a bunch of variables. I mean, if you look at cannabis science in itself, it is really complicated. It is, an amazing area where there are so many different components to that plant that have shown benefit. But there is a lot of variability just within the different strains themselves, and the components. So we have to start somewhere. And where we need to start is at least getting a product or a strain that is similar to what we would want to use in animals. And I think there are going to be several different strains, but we need to start somewhere. And the starting point is actually doing more safety studies and pharmacokinetics to start with. And those are what I have proposed. And we actually have written basically protocols for that. But we just hit a stopping block, but I still have faith that we'll be able to do it in the future.
Okay, and then my other question, well, it's the big $1 million question, is what is the requested to do an adequate job of research money that you would need for this?
Oh, that's a
If
tough
you
one.
had to name
So I will give you, for doing just a pharmacokinetic study, meaning we use dogs of all the same size and all the same breed, so decreasing variables of the individual, and then looking at just CBD or cannabidiol as well as just THC in different concentrations. To run that particular study with 6 dogs, it is about $100,000. And that doesn't include any of, work from clinicians or anything like that. That's just to run the study itself. So clinical studies are much more expensive, and we need to make sure that we get enough funding to do more. Now, research isn't perfect, but again, I think we need this information to have something. I think veterinarians need to be part of the discussion with owners. Owners are left on their own right now, not doing, with totally guidance, as I mentioned, from multiple different people, including companies that are making products that don't have things that are listed on them. There are very good companies that do, but I think we need to be part of that conversation. But one of the things I get calls all the time for veterinarians is, one, being fearful to talk to their clients about it. The second component is we have no information. We don't we don't know how to guide them correctly. We definitely use some of what we've heard from owners, but there is nothing out there, and I think we need this to be able to feel confident to guide our owners, because right now they're on their own, and that's not okay.
Jennifer.
Regarding the survey, I'm not asking for addresses, but where geographically were these people? Were they California residents or?
So part of being the anonymous is we didn't ask them specifically where they were from. But people, I literally have probably about 20 pages of comments from owners, and some of them are quite inspiring, and it feel good that we're moving forward with this research. But we've had people comment, a lot of them are from California, but really all throughout the U.S., and we actually had some international as well.
Okay, because I'm the cynic of the group in this topic,
Fair
but
enough.
my concern is demographically, I work in a community that's very low income and they don't see a veterinarian. So these are people who are sharing their edibles or whatever it
Yeah.
may be. So on some of the questions, the person who said their pet seemed happier, that's really subjective. And anybody saying that pain relief was exhibited, how could you really know that for sure if your animal wasn't diagnosed by a veterinarian? Maybe he was just more sedated and not showing signs. So your comment that vets need to be a part of the conversation, I agree with that, but I'm concerned that a lot of the people who may have taken this survey are never going to see a vet. So I would have more confidence in some sort of a survey by maybe somewhere in Europe where they are using this, veterinarians are regulating the doses. So I'm not saying it doesn't need research, I'm just a little bit cynical.
So I'm sorry, I'm concerned, your concern is that this particular survey, you'd rather have them in areas where they see more veterinarians?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, that's why I asked geographically, because the people that I see using it, the animals that are coming into an emergency clinic, they're not animals that have been diagnosed by a vet. They're.
But but the survey was geared just for pet owners. It wasn't the interaction of a pet owner with a veterinarian. It was just to get information from the pet owner themselves, and really to show that pet owners, even if they weren't seeing veterinarians, that they have an interest and they're going out there and they want to use these products for their animals. And as a veterinarian, I want to know, what are my owners interested in? What do they have access to? What do they think is helpful? So then if they choose to go to a veterinarian will be able to talk to them about it and then help them in the future.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Payton, I recorded that 2/3 of the animals or the public that responded to this had a diagnosis and had some sort of conversation with their veterinarian. Is that correct?
So yes, that's exactly. The 2/3 had a diagnosis. Now that question doesn't ask them specifically if their diagnosis was from their veterinarian, but that's the problem. But they have to record that they had a diagnosis through some sort of test. But the 2/3, it's a separate question that asks them 2/3 did talk to their veterinarian about it. Now, that just means that they spoke to their vet about it, doesn't mean how their vet responded.
Right. Just to respond to Jennifer's concern, 2/3 of the people in this survey from those statistics did actually have a conversation with their vet. Well, I mean, that's true of any survey, Jennifer.
Well, surveys in themselves are notoriously, like I said, the survey was geared specifically to pet owners that were giving these products. But, we have to start with observational research. It's how we gather information with the understanding that, of course, there are biases. But these surveys really do help us to determine, yes, there is a need for further research, and particularly what areas. So my area of interest is pain medicine, so of course I was happy to see that that's one of the responses that they were seeing, but also how we design further research and application.
Dr. Nunez.
I was kind of surprised at that one part of the survey. You said that most of these pets are on cannabis only and not on any other
50%.
medicines. Does that imply, what do you make of that? Does it imply that they don't believe in traditional modes of medicines?
That's a hard one. I don't think you can 100% say exactly what that implies. What we can surmise from it is that 50% that had a diagnosis of those animals, they were only on cannabis. So whether that is because my thinking was that they were only using that product over other medications because 50% also said that they had not tried something else. that didn't work for their animal. Because I wanted to know, does an owner try a bunch of medications that don't work and then go for a cannabis product? Or is there so much interest now that now people are reaching for that for first line? Is it because that their friend told them? Is it because they have tried something in the past with another pet? That's a really hard thing to say. But you know, the only thing we do know is that 50% were only on cannabis. So
I think it's because they see it as natural versus synthetic drugs. Yeah.
well, I think there's a lot of reasons why people will do that, and like I said, I think that owners have a lot of different reasons, and it's hard to fully interpret. And so
Right.
maybe they had a bad experience, but the point being is that you know it is a very big interest to them, and
Right.
there are a lot of different products with a lot of different variability, and we need more information and to be able to talk to them.
Yeah, we can't. We definitely need research.
Thank you.
Kathy.
I just, this is all supposition, but it's really fascinating, the results and everything. I just always, in something like this, especially when we don't know, I just have to wonder if most of these people use it themselves for something like pain or anxiety. And then that's why they thought it would help, and then they feel like it is helping in their own animals. But we obviously can't know that, because I just wondered how many of these folks do not use cannabis for themselves and went out and chose it for their pets.
Yeah, I
But
think
there's so much we don't know.
Right, and I think there's a lot of reasons why people will choose to do things for their pets, and a lot of it has to do with our own, you know, as an owner, what your own personal experience is, but also what's out there in the public view as well. And so, you know, medical cannabis is a huge area right now,
Yeah.
and that's why when we talk about translational pain medicine, it's a big topic.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, with all the kind of rules that we've had as far as, especially in California, you know, it's only included for adults, and for humans and veterinarians, we really have had no, you know, major guidance of what to do, and I think that's why we're all here.
Yeah.
Any other questions of Dr. Payton? Yes, thank you.
You just need a lot of money.
Stick around for a little while.
Okay.
So today here we're discussing what's in our packet is a proposal from CVMA that talks about veterinarians discussing cannabis, and we also have a letter from CVMA that talks about something a little different. So maybe Anne Marie can kind of summarize this.
I'm just going to give you a preview, and then Val Fenstermaker, Executive Director of CVMA, will speak to the actual legislation that I think is forthcoming. So we have had discussions with CVMA about trying to resolve this issue of discussion by a veterinarian with their client, so that they are seeking that information from the veterinarian, as opposed to a pet store owner or maybe an employee at a dispensary or some other uninformed individual that doesn't have the medicine background. However, we've been stuck on the issue of discussion versus recommendation, and so that what's in your packet is a proposal that really limits it to discussion. However, you know, with further, I think, input from their board of directors, CVMA has proposed legislation. Assemblymember Calvera would be carrying this bill. It's not in print yet, Val, or it is? Okay, it is in print. AB 2215. There's a letter before you from Ash Calvera, Assemblymember Calvera, and the exact language that's in the bill, which would expand this from discussion to having recommended cannabis for an animal patient. And from this point, I'll turn it over.
Okay,
Thanks, Val.
thank you. The CVMA has been extensively researching the cannabis issue in light of past and recent changes to state law and its impact on the veterinary profession and the treatment of animals. At the beginning of the process, we thought it would be best to work on legislation that would allow veterinarians to discuss cannabis with their clients, partly based on the B&B legal opinion from Ms. Welch, which was very helpful. We discussed this concept. We've actually been discussing it for a long time, but we had an opportunity at our recent leadership forum to have a really excellent discussion with a lot of different veterinarians from all over the state, a lot of different geographic districts and practice types. And we wanted to get a better understanding with what they're facing from both a federal and state law perspective. And we asked the question, you know, how many of you are approached by your clients and asked questions about marijuana? And I think every veterinarian in the room raised their hand. Some have expressed that it's a daily question. Some more than once a day. Certain areas, not so much. But for the most part, everybody is facing this, and it's a very frustrating problem for the veterinary profession. After a lot of thoughtful consideration, we've reconsidered our position and have concluded that we cannot define where discussion begins and ends. This was another part of our conversation with our members. If we put discussion out there, where would you know where to stop? Where does discussion become recommendation? And this would put them in a very difficult position when discussing cannabis with their clients. The determination is that our legislative direction needs to give California licensed veterinarians the authority to discuss and, if medically appropriate, recommend cannabis for their animal patients within the veterinarian client-patient relationship. This is similar to the authority of physicians in California. We want to emphasize that the CVMA is not supporting the use of cannabis for the treatment of animals with this legislation. This legislation will give veterinarians the legal authority to use their knowledge and experience to counsel their clients, whether that is to discuss, recommend, or not recommend its use. We believe it's the right direction for this legislation. Dr. Payton just mentioned where everybody is getting their information. We've got the marijuana dispensary clerks, we have companies, friends, neighbors, whoever are recommending animal cannabis products and dosages to their client base, customers or friends, but licensed veterinarians are prohibited from providing clinical information and guidance to their clients under current law, and we think this is a huge problem. Assemblymember Calra has introduced AB 2215 as a bill for this legislation. I don't know if you have copies of his letter, but he is very interested in all stakeholders participating, and especially the Veterinary Medical Board. One of the conversations that keeps coming up is the lack of research. And a veterinarian who I respect a lot recently commented on this to me, and I would like to read the response from this member. I have clients who use a cannabis product in their geriatric pet for osteoarthritis or neoplasia-related pain and have seen a positive response. It's hard for me not to support their choice. As in all medical or surgical cases, we evaluate multiple parameters, case by case, and make a recommendation. Often scientific studies have not been completed, but there is a consensus from practical experience. This is what this veterinarian said. And I really think that when you look at this comment, veterinarians are the right people who should be discussing and recommending cannabis, and not all of the other people that we know are doing this illegally out there. So those are my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can sit down so you can discuss it.
Judy.
Well, I think the most disturbing of the survey was how many people are getting their information online, just from people who are selling it and marketing it. That's the most disturbing part to me. And what Val just said, I agree with. If anybody, you know, I would want my vet to be up to speed. And I know that everyone's hands have been tied all these years. And now that California made it legal, you guys are in a pickle. And it's time that we just deal with it and make it right. I'm totally supportive of this. And it's the right way to go.
Kathy.
Do we have a copy of the bill? Just this, we don't have a bill.
We have a bill.
I mean, but we don't have it in front of us, right? The draft?
I think you have our language. That
No,
we
this
have.
is that it? That's the whole language of it?
No, the bill just.
This section right
It's
here.
AB 2215. I don't think you have
We don't
a
have
copy
a-
of AB 2215.
But it, okay.
But this language that you have, we have given to Assemblymember Calra.
That's what you'd suggested. Okay, got it. Well, I just wanted to check to see if I
Sure.
actually had a bill here, because I didn't see it. I understand what I understand what the vets are saying. I certainly understand it. And I understand that I would want all of my advice to come from my vet. And I do get it from my vets, for my animals, as opposed to my friends or even human doctors. But I still don't understand how a vet professionally could recommend it without having enough backup research. Now, I'm not a vet, but it seems like we're doing the cart before the horse, and the cart's supposed to hold all this research, but we haven't done the research yet. Or it hasn't been done. Doesn't sound like there's anything definitive out there on the kinds of questions people are probably asking their vets all the time. I agree with, I don't like them to be put in jeopardy, but I also think it's a slippery slope between being able to recommend and then being able to dose and everything else without a ton of research behind it for the animals. That's just my concern about this. So anyway, I don't know, and you must have discussed it. Were many vets saying they wouldn't recommend it, or because they didn't have research?
There are veterinarians who would absolutely not recommend it, and there are veterinarians who feel comfortable going down that road, either discussing it or some type of recommendation where a client may come to them and say, I'm using this much, where they would then feel comfortable to caution that client, maybe don't use that much, maybe start slow. I don't want to speak for all of them, but I think in looking at the problems with the lack of research, that could be 20 years from now. And the problem is right now. And I think that there are veterinarians who feel that they need to be able to discuss and recommend or not recommend it to their clients. And the opposite of that is everybody else doing it besides veterinarian, and that's not a comfortable position for the profession to be in. Thank you.
Tara has a question.
Just one question. Is there a reason why you chose to propose to change the Veterinary Medicine Practice Act rather than the Uniform Controlled Substances Act?
That was on through discussions with our legislative advocates and their research into the issue. I would have to talk to them further. I know that I did pass along that question to them. They were more comfortable with it in the Practice Act. And I also just wanted to add that we have talked to the Medical Association. They have developed and spent a lot of time developing their guidelines. And so if something like this were to go through, I think they would be a great resource to talk to because they've been down this road.
Dr. Nunez.
I completely agree with your presentation, but since CVMA is now going to support recommending marijuana, does CVMA have resources that veterinarians could, until more research comes out, are you making available resources that veterinarians can use to learn more about it?
That generally is not what we do as an association. I think that those are something that we would look into, and at this point we haven't researched resources.
There might be, I don't know if there's other people in the audience that might be able to provide resources of where veterinarians can go to.
Again, I want to make it clear that we're not recommending the use of marijuana. What we're trying to do is make it possible for veterinarians to decide whether they want to recommend, not recommend, or discuss it with their clients. Thank you.
I have to say that I'm in with Kathy, that I'm hesitant to have veterinarians recommend something where we really don't have the science behind it. Maybe I'm too much of a purist, but I'm very hesitant about recommending. I'm fine with discussing.
So you'd rather them get it online as the alternative?
They're going to get it online anyway. But, I think it behooves us. I think it's our responsibility to act in a responsible manner, and this board needs to be behind the best practices. So that's my opinion, but
I did have one more thing on the research. It also seems to me with animals as opposed to humans, so there's basically one type of human generally, is all the various species differences and the response things and things like that. I just don't know how someone would feel all of a sudden comfortable doing, recommending that for an avian, a parrot or something, without a lot of backup research. I assume everything else my vet recommends to me, it's because there's been a lot of research and he's had or she's had a lot of education on it. So that's the other thing I have about the animal side, is the species.
Dr. Sullivan.
I do have some comments, and I need to stay on text, otherwise I get in trouble. I want to make it clear my comments are in no way endorsing treating animal patients with cannabis at this point in time as a general practitioner. But I have a different view as to why we need to be able to also recommend. I see this issue in three areas. One is writing statute, the other is doing research, and the third is the issue of enforcement. It is always more difficult to introduce legislation in the form of a statute with the language discussion in there, and then 3 or 4 years later come back and add recommendation. I think that it's better to do it at one time, get the process through, and we have a perfect model to follow, which is the physician's model, which has already been mentioned. Everyone agrees that research is essential in getting good information to the profession and then to the public. There are two main ways that we get research done in veterinary medicine. One is if an animal is a good model for a disease in humans, researchers are able to get research grants to study that disease and new medication trials in that species. For example, the dog is a perfect example to study congestive heart failure. It's a perfect model for the human disease. And we oftentimes will get information on new medications relating to congestive heart failure before the cardiologists get it. However, the dog is not a good model to study marijuana. The monkey is. Second, the second way we get receive research information is by specialists using new drugs for humans extra-labelly with their client's consent. After they have sufficient number of cases and after they've applied statistical analysis, they determine if this is scientifically significant and publish it or present it at a CE meeting. This is the most common way that we learn about new drugs and new uses of common human drugs. I am very doubtful, and if I'm wrong, I'll be the happiest person in the world, but I'm very doubtful in this environment with the huge cuts in NIH grants due to our recent tax legislations, recent cut in our tax legislation, that there's going to be money to do studies on marijuana research in dogs. And even if there is, we're talking about years down the road. Why not allow specialists the ability to do research now, just as they are doing on many, many projects today, by including recommend in this language, just like it is in the physician's legislation? That research can start right away. And that is by far the way that we receive most of our information on the extra label use of drugs. The third area of discussion is enforcement. And to me, nothing has changed today with this. Today, if there is an adverse event after the use of an extra label drug or the use of any drug, that veterinarian must document why it is used, what dose was used, and what his or her source of information for using that drug is in that situation. That information comes from the specialists that are doing the drug trials on their patients with client consent, and then publishing that information for the rest of us. In conclusion, what is best for our animal patients is for veterinarians to have the ability to discuss and use the use of marijuana with their clients, and to allow the specialists to start developing the research that, one, sees if it actually works, and two, get the information out to practitioners as soon as possible. And that we can do with the physicians presently have, by the way that physicians presently have with the two words discuss and recommend. With that, I would like to see the Veterinary Medical Board, the legislation that uses the physician's legislative model to allow veterinarians to discuss and recommend the use of medical marijuana in animals.
Judy.
I think it would be good for CVMA maybe to come up with a knowledge base that, the peer review stuff could, start accumulating, that if there is a veterinarian and, like Dick said, if the consumer wants to say, okay, I want to try this for my dog, and you start with the lowest dose, you see how it works, we know it's not going to do harm, and if it just doesn't do any good, you stop using it, right? And if it does do good, then we document that and we start the research organically, like Dr. Selvin suggesting. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that I thought that was a really good part. But I say leave the monkeys alone. Leave them alone. Thank you.
Dr. Payton, would you mind approaching? So just comments as the enforcement officer of the board. I'm not comfortable with no veterinarian in the state shall be disciplined by the board. And then we talk about denied any right, privilege for having discussed if medically appropriate and having recommended cannabis for an animal patient. I respectfully disagree with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Sullivan, who knows a lot more than I do about veterinary medicine. But I will retain the right to be somewhat of an expert on what happens when we have an enforcement case. And having this be a battle of experts when there are no experts in this area is a very dangerous place to put the Veterinary Medical Board in terms of tying our hands to discipline someone who may abuse cannabis with a patient. And I don't know what the right answer here is, so I'm not claiming to know that I'm going to be able to define discussion to the extent that it's going to satisfy everybody. Assemblymember Cholera is very interested in the board and the profession and all of the interested parties coming together with a reasonable solution. And I think that's the right, obviously, direction for all the parties to go. I would ask this board to be cautious about this. Recommendation, in my mind, has a connotation of endorsement. Recommendation also has been linked to dosing. And I think that we just need to be cognizant of that before we say, okay, well, because we don't want to wait 20 years, we should be somewhat irresponsible today. I don't think that's the message that should come out of the Veterinary Medical Board as a consumer protection board. I agree with all of the statements in the room. We do not want clients getting this information from non-medical professionals. However, we also don't want to set up veterinarians to be in a position where they do feel like they're being pressured, if you will, to make certain recommendations because now it's under their Practice Act to do so, and they don't have guide rails. They don't have information to resource to determine what is the appropriate dosing for an animal. So I would just ask the board to keep that in mind, coming from the perspective of a consumer protection board and also as an enforcement officer. I really struggle with that the board has no disciplinary authority over a veterinarian recommending cannabis.
Good. Tara, you want to go first?
I just wanted to make a note that because of the placement of the language, there would be no protection for the DEA registration, which I think is a big deal. I think veterinarians would still be very leery of having the discussion or recommending the use of a controlled substance on Schedule 1 for that reason, which is why, if there were any changes, it would necessarily need to start with the Uniform Controlled Substances Act, just like the physicians did, which is also where the research was provided, which provides cover for any university as well. And then you can get into the Practice Act particularities and guidelines from that perspective.
Kathy?
I just wanted to refresh my memory. Did you say there were no or relatively few peer-reviewed, published studies because of the problems about using the federal source and things like that? Like no study, very few studies that have been published?
Yeah, so when we're looking at animal models specifically, even for clinical, especially clinical models, because of the Schedule 1, there are not peer reviewed for any like applications. There's one study that was done looking at the pharmacokinetics in CBD in a dog, and also the urinary excretion that was done in 1984. But beyond that, there are no peer reviewed research. So I guess I want to go back and, if it's all right, to answer Dr. Sullivan's comments because I thought they were very good. The only thing I would say is I've been very fortunate to work with the medical center, with the pain group over there. And so working with several MDs that deal specifically with pain medicine, and the medical cannabis issue comes up quite a bit with patients. The problem is I think that we have to be careful because the physician model is not actually working all that well. And why I say that is, even though physicians are allowed to recommend and approve, because that a lot of the physicians actually are very concerned about recommending because it is not very clear, and they are also, even though there's some protection, they're very concerned about the DEA, as well as there's so much variability to products that are out there, even for people, for regulation. And so the majority of the MDs that I work with that do pain medicine at the Med Center, as well as other universities, they will not recommend. And that's what's caused setting up small satellite clinics of MDs that is solely what they do is recommend for people. So I do think we have to be a little cautious when we say that we're going to model what physicians are doing, because I don't think that it's worked really clearly for them as well. The other problem that I completely agree with the monkey model, although we don't want to use them, but there is a role for that as well. But I think enforcement-wise for research, the problem is that even specialists, when we want to do research, and even in private practice, you can't. You will not be able, it is not legal, and you have no protection, and you actually cannot do that research. And people have tried. That's what I mentioned earlier, is that there are other universities and people in private practice that have been trying to get published their research using different cannabis products and hemp products. They cannot get it published in peer-reviewed journals because it is illegal. So that's a very big issue for research. So, we have to, my view of it is, as I said, personally, I think that what I'm seeing with clients is, yes, there is benefit and I want to support this, but I do think we have to do it correctly. And I do think that we will be able to get that research done very soon. It's just, we even need a basis. Like, as I mentioned, we don't have good pharmacokinetics to even base it off of. That one study that was done was not done with dosing that we even use, that people are using for, cannabis in pets. So we actually need to get these studies done to move forward, to have a basis, and we can do it. That's what I've been working on. It literally is just getting the funding. It's just getting money to put into there. And I'm hoping that will come along because we're here, we're all talking about it, and we're on the verge of doing something good for our clients, but I really do hesitate. It's a very fine line with recommendation. I really believe in discussing, meaning I want to be able to talk to my owners about what there is and what there isn't. It's important that owners know that there is no research, that we don't have very good safety and efficacy studies. But yes, can they go out and get their own? Of course, we cannot supply it for them. But I do think we have to be careful how we move along with this because it is a fine line between recommendation and prescribing.
Judy.
So I think you just answered my question. You're not a proponent of the CVMA language that says recommend. You're at the old language that was just limited to discuss. And where does discuss begin and end and not turn into any kind of recommendation?
So the problem right
Dr.
now,
Payton,
yes.
I don't want you to have to answer that. You
Okay.
don't need to.
Oh,
she shouldn't, she's representing UC Davis. She shouldn't answer whether she supports or doesn't support
Oh.
legislation. That's not why she's here today.
Oh, okay, and I thought I just
About your
heard what.
personal feelings about, if you want to discuss your personal feelings because you've been behind trying to research this, I just don't want you to put yourself in a position where you're supporting or
I
opposing
appreciate it.
legislation.
Yeah, I think, I always say I play the scientific view, which is I want more information to be able to give that information. For example, right now, I think education is a very big component. And at school, with our service, we do teach students about what is in the literature, which is the endocannabinoid system. That has been proven. That is an important thing that they need to learn. But we don't know, and it has not been established what the appropriate doses are. So I think that it's very hard for us to then, recommend something that we don't. What are the right doses? What is the right thing to do? So that's my personal feeling right now. But
Thank you.
Dr. Payton, do you know whether if there was a benefactor that would like to identify themselves here today that wants to, I'm just joking, but if there was private funding that we could come up with to support the efforts of UC Davis, whether or not that's acceptable, or does it have to come through a federal grant? It doesn't.
It
So
doesn't.
it can be private funding.
Correct. So one of the first things we're looking at is, you're correct with the NIH cutting a lot of money, but when I actually went to, I'm diverting just for a second, but I went to the NIH pain conference not too long ago where we were talking about animal models specifically for pain and translation. And the NIH will not consider any cannabinoid applications currently. That's for people too. They are very interested in endocannabinoid research though. And there's a whole grant that's just specifically for endocannabinoid research, which is something I'm looking into. So that's actually a starting point to some degree. But other areas of funding, while it does not have to be federal, it can be from private donations. Companies are a little bit difficult, but anyone can donate. The key is particularly for this research, is that it has to really come with no strings attached. And that's very, very, very important because it is such a controversial issue. But funding can come from pretty much any source, as far as I'm aware of. I'll add that.
Thank you.
Yes.